the paradox of belief without evidence. Have you ever noticed how strange it is that billions of people across the world commit their entire lives to systems of belief that lack any clear, verifiable evidence? This is perhaps one of the greatest paradoxes of human history. People are willing to devote their identities, their choices, their families, and even their sense of morality to religions that demand absolute loyalty without offering proof that can be tested or confirmed. In any other area of life, science, law, medicine, or even day-to-day decisions, we ask for evidence before we commit ourselves. If someone tells you a pill will heal your disease, you demand clinical trials. If a lawyer makes a claim in court, they must show evidence. If a friend insists that aliens live in their basement, you would expect them to show you something more than just their word. And yet, when it comes to religion, the very thing that claims to explain the deepest mysteries of life and death, the universe, morality, and destiny, we are told that asking for proof is itself wrong, even sinful. This is the paradox of belief without evidence. The more extraordinary the claim, the less evidence is provided, and the more faith is demanded. Think about the core foundations of major world religions. Stories of prophets speaking directly to God through burning bushes, heavenly dictations on mountains, visions of angels delivering cosmic truths, or men walking on water are treated not just as possible tales, but as sacred and unquestionable facts. Yet, in every case, there is no independent confirmation, no physical record, no method of verification, only the testimony of a few ancient figures whose words have been copied, edited, translated, and reshaped for centuries. Still, billions accept these stories as truth, not because the stories have been proven, but because they are told with authority, passed down through tradition, and enforced with guilt. Consider how this works in practice. If someone today walked into a crowded city square and said, "I just spoke with God. He told me how you should live, what rules to follow, and that I alone am his messenger," most people would doubt them, dismiss them as delusional, or even have them examined by medical professionals. Yet when the same claim is made in a book written 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, preserved by generations of priests, monks, or clerics, suddenly the claim is granted automatic respect. The passage of time does not make a story more reliable, but in religion, it makes the story sacred. This shows us something crucial about how religious belief functions. It does not begin with evidence. It begins with authority. From childhood, most people are born into a culture that tells them which holy book is true, which prophets are genuine, and which rituals are sacred. Rarely do people choose their religion through investigation. Rather, their religion is chosen for them before they are old enough to question it. And once belief takes root, it is shielded by emotion, community, and fear. To question the belief is to question your parents, your culture, your place in society, and even your hope for eternal life. That weight is enough to silence curiosity. But pause for a moment and compare this with how we normally approach truth in every other domain. Imagine a teacher saying to her students, "You must believe what I say, and if you doubt me, you are immoral." Or imagine a scientist saying, "I don't need to show you experiments. You just need to have faith in my results." We would never accept this. The scientific method thrives on skepticism. Courts of law depend on cross-examination and evidence. Medicine advances only when treatments are tested, measured, and challenged. Yet in religion, the very act of doubt is labeled as weakness, rebellion, or sin. In this way, faith is elevated as a virtue, while skepticism, normally the path to truth, is painted as dangerous. And here lies the paradox. The more implausible the claim, the more faith is praised. To believe in the ordinary requires no faith. You don't need faith to believe the sun will rise tomorrow, or that water will quench your thirst, or that gravity keeps you grounded. These things can be tested and experienced by all. But to believe that a man once split the sea with his staff, or that a prophet received the final word of the universe from an angel, or that an eternal heaven and hell await us after death, these require suspending the normal rules of evidence and logic. Instead of saying, "This seems unlikely, I need proof," religion teaches us to say, "This seems unlikely, and that is why believing it is noble." Faith becomes an act of willpower, a declaration of loyalty, not a path to knowledge. Now, it is important to recognize how powerful this paradox has been in shaping civilizations. Whole societies have been built upon the willingness of people to accept without proof. Empires were sustained, wars were fought, and laws were written based on revelations that could never be independently verified. Religion has acted as a binding force precisely because it demands loyalty beyond reason. If belief required evidence, then religions would be tested, compared, and discarded like any other human theory. But because belief is tied to faith, it can resist disproof. When a prophecy fails, it is reinterpreted. When contradictions appear in Scripture, they are explained away as metaphor. When evidence conflicts with doctrine, believers are told that the evidence is incomplete, misleading, or a test of faith. In this way, religion protects itself from falsification. The question, then, is not why people believe, but why people feel so compelled to believe without evidence. The answer lies in the psychological comfort religion provides. Humans fear uncertainty, death, and chaos. Religion offers absolute answers where science and philosophy often offer only probabilities and humility. It says, "You are not alone. You are guided, watched, loved, and destined for eternity." These are comforting words, even if unsupported. To question them means to step into uncertainty, to accept that we do not yet know all the answers, to live with mystery. That takes courage, and courage is much harder than comfort. So part one leaves us with this central paradox. In no other realm of life is faith without evidence considered a strength, but in religion, it is celebrated as the highest virtue. It is this reversal of logic, this demand to believe not because something is demonstrated, but because it is sacred. That sets the stage for all the other contradictions and complications we will examine. Religion thrives on this paradox, and until we recognize it, we cannot understand why belief remains so powerful, even in the modern world. Expanded rewrite, 1,000 plus words. Now, let's take a step deeper into this strange world of belief by focusing on two very vivid examples: the sacred cows of India and the South Korean sect that believes their pastor, though long dead, continues to spiritually govern them. At first glance, both might seem like completely different stories. One is about an ancient cultural tradition tied to Hinduism, while the other comes from a very modern fringe Christian offshoot in East Asia. Yet, if you look beneath the surface, both reveal how societies and individuals build layers of meaning around belief, how those beliefs become self-reinforcing, and how they end up shaping behavior in ways that outsiders often find baffling. Let's start with the cows. In India, cows are more than animals. They are living, breathing embodiments of life, fertility, and nourishment. Historically, Hindu texts and traditions praise the cow because it provided milk, dung for fuel, and labor for farming, all without being killed. It became a symbol of nonviolence and generosity, offering so much without demanding blood in return. Over centuries, this reverence solidified into something much stronger, a sacred status that made cows untouchable. To kill or even mistreat one became not only taboo, but sacrilegious. Now, here's where it gets fascinating. For many people outside India, the idea of worshiping a cow sounds absurd. They look at it and think, it's just livestock. What's so divine about that? But within the cultural and religious context, the cow is not simply an animal. It's a moral anchor. It represents life itself, a reminder of interconnectedness, and a living symbol of ahimsa, or nonviolence, which is central to Hindu philosophy. By protecting cows, people believe they are aligning themselves with cosmic order, with dharma, with righteousness itself. And here's the catch. Once a belief like this gets embedded into the cultural and religious fabric, it becomes self-reinforcing. Children grow up hearing stories of sacred cows, communities enforce respect for them, and political leaders invoke their protection as a point of cultural pride. So even if you're not personally religious, you're still immersed in a society where the cow is not just an animal, but a marker of identity. Disrespecting it means disrespecting the group, the heritage, the entire value system. That's why even today, debates about cow slaughter in India aren't just about food or farming. They're about belonging, loyalty, and faith. For millions of Hindus, reverence for the cow is an unshakable truth, something beyond logic, beyond debate. And whether you agree with it or not, it has shaped entire laws, economies, and political movements. Now let's jump thousands of miles to South Korea, where a very different kind of belief took hold in a modern religious sect. Imagine this. A pastor passes away, but his followers insist he is still in charge. Not metaphorically, not in memory, but spiritually, actively guiding the church as if death itself had no authority over him. To outsiders, this sounds like denial, or even delusion. But within the sect, it's seen as loyalty, as faith in the promise that their leader's authority extends beyond the grave. Psychologists might call this cognitive dissonance management. When reality contradicts belief, humans often bend reality to protect belief, not the other way around. In this case, accepting that the pastor died would mean admitting their faith was misplaced, that their leader was not divine. That realization would collapse the entire worldview they built their lives around. So instead, they resolve the dissonance by declaring, "He didn't truly die. He still rules us spiritually." This is not entirely new. History is filled with leaders who maintained power after death, at least in the minds of their followers. Ancient pharaohs of Egypt were worshipped as divine even after burial, and Roman emperors were deified posthumously, their cults continuing long after their deaths. But what makes the South Korean case so striking is that it's happening right now, in a modern, globalized society where information flows freely and skepticism is widespread. Despite that, the sect's members remain convinced, organizing their lives around this idea that their leader is still present, still commanding, still the ultimate authority. So what do these two examples, the sacred cow in India and the immortalized pastor in South Korea, have in common? At their core, they both reveal something about human psychology and society's need for symbols. Beliefs like these are rarely about the literal claim. It's not really about whether the cow is biologically sacred or whether the pastor is physically alive. It's about what these beliefs do for people. They create order in chaos. They give individuals a sense of belonging to something larger than themselves. They build walls of identity that protect the group from outside threat. Think about it this way. Believing in sacred cows creates unity among Hindus, marking a clear boundary between insiders and outsiders. Believing that the pastor still rules creates cohesion within the sect, strengthening loyalty and preventing cracks in the group's structure. Both systems of belief are essentially survival strategies. They make communities more resilient by giving them shared rituals, shared stories, and shared symbols that resist the erosion of doubt. But here's the paradox. From the outside, these beliefs look absurd. People scoff at them, mock them, and wonder how millions could possibly accept such claims. Yet, when you step inside, they are perfectly rational, at least within the framework of that cultural or religious system. And that's the secret to understanding why certain beliefs endure. They don't survive because they make logical sense. They survive because they serve social and emotional needs. Let me put it bluntly. Humans don't cling to beliefs because they are true. They cling to them because they are useful. A belief that strengthens identity, reduces fear, explains the unexplainable, or unites a community will outlast logic every single time. So when you see a cow calmly walking through the chaotic streets of Delhi, unbothered by cars or crowds, know that it's not just an animal. It's a centuries-old symbol keeping millions tethered to a moral order. And when you hear of a South Korean sect swearing loyalty to a pastor who's been dead for years, understand that it's not just blind faith. It's a community fighting to preserve meaning, identity, and cohesion in a world that constantly threatens to pull it all apart. These examples remind us of something crucial. Faith doesn't need to be logical to be powerful. It just needs to be felt, shared, and reinforced. And once that happens, no amount of outside ridicule or rational argument can shake it. Belief as a shield against chaos. Let's continue with a question. Why do humans cling so fiercely to beliefs that from the outside may look strange or even illogical? One powerful reason is that belief acts like a shield against chaos. The world is unpredictable. Death, illness, loss, injustice, and suffering can strike at any moment. For most of human history, people didn't have modern science, technology, or psychology to make sense of these experiences. Instead, they built systems of meaning through religion. Even today, despite scientific progress, the emotional comfort of belief is hard to replace. Take the example of sacred cows in India. To outsiders, the reverence for cows might seem impractical, even absurd, especially in a country where poverty and hunger remain pressing issues. But the deeper story is that the cow became a symbol of life, abundance, and continuity in Hindu tradition. For rural farmers, the cow was not just an animal, it was a source of milk, fertilizer, and labor. Over centuries, protecting the cow transformed into a spiritual principle, deeply intertwined with identity and community. For a Hindu, the cow is not merely a creature, it is a living reminder of the divine generosity of nature. That's why questioning this belief often feels not like a debate, but like an attack on cultural survival. Now, compare that with the South Korean sect that continues to believe a deceased pastor still leads spiritually. From a rational perspective, it raises eyebrows. How can someone dead maintain authority? But psychologically, the community isn't clinging to his literal presence. They're clinging to the stability his leadership represented. His death could have shattered the movement, leaving followers lost and leaderless. By declaring him still spiritually present, they maintain cohesion, avoid fragmentation, and preserve the sense that their journey has not ended. It's less about logic and more about survival of identity. If you look closely, this pattern repeats across history. Ancient Egyptians believed pharaohs were divine. Romans deified emperors. Medieval kings ruled by the grace of God. These weren't just political tricks. They were mechanisms to keep order in societies where life was fragile and uncertain. The ruler wasn't just a person. He or she was a symbolic anchor in a stormy sea. Even today, you can see traces of this psychological need in the way people rally around charismatic leaders, whether religious, political, or cultural. There's also something universal here. Belief gives us a sense of control over what feels uncontrollable. If a community believes that rituals can bring rain, or that a leader continues to guide them after death, they feel less vulnerable. The rituals may not change the weather, and the leader may no longer be alive, but psychologically, the act of believing softens anxiety. It transforms helplessness into purpose. Without such systems, human beings are left staring into the abyss of randomness. And that's something most minds resist. But here's the important twist. From within the system, these beliefs don't feel strange at all. They feel natural, logical, even necessary. Imagine growing up in a family where from birth you're told cows are sacred or that your pastor still rules spiritually. You don't wake up questioning it, it's woven into your identity. To reject it would not only mean rejecting the belief, but also rejecting your community, your family, and often your sense of self. That's why so many seemingly irrational practices endure. They're not simply about ideas, they're about belonging. And when you realize that, you start to see belief not as a quirky feature of certain cultures, but as a universal human need. We all, in one way or another, create stories that shield us from chaos. Some of us believe in science and progress, others in gods and prophets, others in systems of spirituality or philosophy. Strip away the differences, and the core is the same. The human mind needs order, meaning, and protection. So when we look at practices like worshiping sacred cows or honoring a dead pastor as an active leader, the question isn't really, how can they believe that? The more interesting question is, what chaos is this belief protecting them from? And once we see that, the practice shifts from being absurd to being deeply human. The power of collective faith. If belief shields individuals from chaos, collective faith amplifies that protection 1,000-fold. One person's conviction can be powerful, but when shared by a community, belief transforms into a living force that binds, motivates, and sustains. It ceases to be just an idea in the mind. It becomes a culture, a tradition, a way of life that shapes every choice, every ritual, and every relationship. And in many cases, this collective faith is precisely what ensures the survival of groups through hardship, poverty, or persecution. Consider again the image of sacred cows in India. It is not just a private belief held by a few. It is a shared conviction that unites millions. When a society collectively honors the cow, the belief becomes a powerful social glue. Families cook vegetarian meals not only for health or taste, but as an act of spiritual respect. Farmers treat cattle not simply as animals, but as extensions of their livelihood and identity. Street processions and festivals showcase cows adorned with colors and flowers, reinforcing their sacred status. The strength lies not in the belief itself, but in the way it is shared across generations. This is how traditions that may look impractical to outsiders endure for centuries. They are carried by collective faith, not individual whim. Now, let's move to the South Korean sect, where followers insist their pastor still leads them spiritually after his death. Alone, an individual insisting this might be dismissed as delusional. But when hundreds or thousands affirm the same story together, it gains momentum and authority. Doubt becomes harder when everyone around you repeats the same truth. Sociologists call this collective reinforcement, a phenomenon where repetition within a group transforms uncertainty into certainty. That's why even the most unusual beliefs can solidify into long-lasting traditions when embraced communally. History is filled with examples of this. Think of medieval Europe, where entire kingdoms unified under the belief that kings ruled by divine right. Even when rulers were corrupt or incompetent, the collective faith in divine monarchy kept society stable. Or think of ancient Rome, where emperors were deified after death. Did everyone literally believe the emperor turned into a god? Perhaps not. But the shared act of reverence, temples built, rituals performed, coins minted with divine imagery, gave the empire a sense of unity and order. The belief didn't just hold spiritual meaning, it held political and cultural power. Collective faith also creates something deeper, identity. For many communities, what you believe is not just a matter of private conviction, it is the essence of who you are. To be Hindu is to honor the cow. To be part of a sect is to honor its founder, alive or dead. The belief defines the boundaries of belonging. It says, if you share this truth, you are one of us. If you reject it, you are outside. That boundary is what makes faith so resilient. It is not just about ideas. It is about family, loyalty, heritage, and survival. And this is why challenging collective faith is so difficult. When outsiders point out logical contradictions, they are not merely questioning ideas. They are threatening identity. Imagine telling someone their sacred symbol is meaningless, or their spiritual leader has no power. From your perspective, you are offering clarity. From theirs, you are attacking their very sense of self. This is why debates about religion often escalate quickly, not because people are unwilling to think, but because they sense their belonging is on the line. At the same time, collective faith can inspire extraordinary acts of resilience. Think of persecuted groups throughout history: the Jews during centuries of exile, Christians in the Roman Empire, Buddhists under political suppression. What sustained them was not weapons, wealth, or power. It was collective belief, a shared conviction that their suffering had meaning, that their identity was rooted in something eternal, that their rituals carried divine significance. That kind of faith can outlast empires, outlive tyrants, and endure through generations. But here lies the paradox. The same collective faith that can preserve identity can also limit growth. When communities refuse to question or adapt their beliefs, they risk becoming rigid, resistant to change, even hostile to outsiders. The very glue that holds them together can harden into walls that keep others out. Sacred cows may inspire reverence, but they can also create tensions in a modernizing society. Believing a dead pastor still leads might preserve unity, but it can also prevent members from engaging with the wider world. So how should we see collective faith? Not as a mistake, not as foolishness, but as a profoundly human response to the fragility of life. Belief shared in community is not merely about doctrine. It is about survival, identity, and belonging. Even if we do not share those beliefs, understanding their function helps us see why they endure and why they deserve respect, even when they appear strange. Ultimately, collective faith reveals a truth about humanity. We are meaning-making creatures, and we make meaning best together. Alone, our doubts can overwhelm us. Together, our convictions can build civilizations. When belief outruns logic. There is a moment in every tradition where belief begins to outrun logic, and it is here that outsiders often shake their heads. From the inside, the conviction feels natural, inevitable, even sacred. From the outside, it can appear puzzling, irrational, or even absurd. And yet, it is precisely this leap beyond logic that gives faith its staying power, because logic alone cannot sustain the human spirit in the face of life's deepest uncertainties. Take, for example, the centuries-long conviction in various cultures that celestial events directly determine earthly fates. Ancient rulers frequently consulted astrologers before making decisions of war, marriage, or trade. A solar eclipse might be interpreted as divine displeasure. The position of Jupiter could dictate whether a kingdom would expand or collapse. To the modern mind, armed with astronomy and physics, this seems naive. Yet in societies without scientific explanation, these beliefs gave order to chaos. They offered rulers a framework for decision making when uncertainty could mean catastrophe. Even today, astrology continues to thrive worldwide, not because people lack education, but because the symbolic meaning resonates with the human longing for guidance. Similarly, consider the practice of relic worship across many religious traditions. A bone fragment, a scrap of cloth, or a vial of blood from a revered saint can draw pilgrims from across continents. To skeptics, these relics are nothing more than decayed remains, objects without inherent power. But to believers, they are living bridges to the divine, tangible proof that the sacred touches the material world. Entire cathedrals have been built to house such relics. Economies have thrived on pilgrimages, and wars have even been fought to claim them. From a logical perspective, this devotion seems misplaced. From a spiritual perspective, it embodies the very essence of faith, the belief that the eternal manifests through the physical. Or look at the case of apocalyptic prophecies. Time and again, leaders have proclaimed specific dates for the end of the world. And time and again, when those dates pass uneventfully, followers do not always abandon the faith. Instead, they reinterpret, adjust, and continue believing with even greater fervor. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance reduction, the mind's way of resolving the tension between expectation and reality. If you have already sacrificed your possessions, distanced yourself from family, or staked your reputation on a prophecy, admitting it was false feels unbearable. So instead, you reinterpret the outcome. Perhaps the prophecy was symbolic. Perhaps the date was spiritual rather than literal. Perhaps the failure was a test of loyalty. To outsiders, this seems irrational. To insiders, it feels like a deepening of faith. This pattern, where failed predictions strengthen belief rather than weaken it, reveals something essential. Faith is not about empirical accuracy. It is about existential security. People cling to beliefs not because they perfectly match external reality, but because they provide inner stability. To laugh at this is to misunderstand its function. When life is unpredictable, belief is not a luxury, it is an anchor. At times, belief even thrives precisely because it defies logic. The more outrageous a claim, the more it demands total commitment. If someone tells you to believe only what seems reasonable, you can weigh it, test it, and walk away. But if someone tells you to believe something that seems impossible, such as a corpse guiding the living or an ordinary animal being a sacred vessel, the act of believing becomes transformative. It demands surrender, loyalty, and trust beyond reason. And it is this surrender that binds communities together with extraordinary force. History gives us countless examples. Medieval peasants once believed that the relic of a saint could cure diseases incurable by medicine. Entire villages would walk barefoot for miles to touch a shrine, hoping for healing. Did all of them find miraculous cures? Likely not. But the collective act of pilgrimage gave them hope, strengthened their bonds, and infused their suffering with meaning. Likewise, in modern sects where leaders make grand claims, whether of immortality, divine incarnation, or secret knowledge, the very outlandishness of the belief becomes the proof. If it were false, followers reason, why would anyone dare to proclaim it? Outsiders see manipulation. Insiders see courage. This raises a deeper question. Why does humanity consistently embrace beliefs that stretch or even contradict rational thought? The answer lies in the limits of reason itself. Logic can tell us how the stars move, but not why we exist. Science can explain illness, but not always heal the heart. Mathematics can measure time, but it cannot give meaning to the fact that time will end for each of us. Belief steps in where logic falls silent. It is not meant to replace knowledge, but to carry us through the spaces where knowledge cannot go. And yet, this leap beyond logic has consequences. On the one hand, it inspires resilience, unity, and courage. On the other, it can be exploited. Leaders who realize the power of belief beyond reason can manipulate followers into submission, sacrifice, or even violence. Entire populations have been mobilized by convictions that had little basis in fact, but immense power in the realm of faith. This is the double-edged sword of belief. It liberates the soul, but it can also enslave the mind. So when we look at traditions that seem irrational to us, the sacred cow, the immortal pastor, the relic, the prophecy, We must ask, what role does this belief play for those who hold it? If it gives them dignity, hope, and identity, perhaps its value is greater than its logic. But if it traps them in fear, manipulation, or isolation, then the leap beyond logic becomes dangerous. Ultimately, to say that belief outruns logic is not to condemn it, but to recognize its power. Human beings are not purely rational creatures. We are storytellers, seekers, beings who long for more than explanations. We long for meaning. And sometimes, meaning requires us to step beyond the bounds of reason, into the mysterious territory where belief takes root and endures. When belief shapes identity, to understand why beliefs, no matter how strange they appear, endure with such force, we must recognize that belief is not only about gods, rituals, or metaphysics. It is about identity. To believe is not simply to accept an idea. It is to declare, this is who I am. This is where I belong. When a community shares a belief, however improbable it seems, that belief becomes the thread that binds individuals into a single fabric. To reject it is not merely to disagree. It is to risk exile, shame, or the loss of belonging itself. Consider dietary laws found across the world. In some faiths, eating pork is considered unclean. In others, beef is forbidden. In still others, alcohol is prohibited. From a purely nutritional standpoint, these rules may appear arbitrary, even unnecessary. But their function is not nutritional. It is cultural and spiritual. By adhering to them, followers distinguish themselves from outsiders, reinforcing a sense of us versus them. Breaking the rule does not simply mean eating the wrong food. It means betraying the community's very identity. In this way, belief transcends logic and becomes a marker of belonging. This dynamic explains why beliefs are defended with such passion. When outsiders laugh at a ritual or dismiss a doctrine, believers often feel not merely challenged, but attacked in their very essence. A faith community does not hold to its practices because they are rational, but because they are theirs. And when identity is threatened, people will defend it with astonishing resilience. History shows countless examples of small sects enduring persecution, exile, even death, rather than abandoning their convictions. From the martyrs of early Christianity to minority religious groups in modern nations, belief survives not because it makes logical sense, but because it tells people who they are. Take, for example, the tradition of circumcision in certain faiths. To an outsider, the ritual may appear unnecessary or even cruel. Yet within the community, it is a sacred covenant, a rite of passage that affirms identity and continuity across generations. The same is true for indigenous tattoos, scarification rituals, or unique forms of dress such as turbans, veils, or sacred beads. These practices are not defended because they are objectively rational. They are defended because they serve as living symbols of identity. Each stitch, scar, or mark is a declaration of belonging. We see this again in the endurance of pilgrimage traditions. Millions each year walk barefoot to holy sites, circle shrines, or climb mountains in grueling heat. To a secular observer, such effort might seem excessive. Why not pray quietly at home? But for the believer, the physical act is inseparable from the spiritual identity. To make the pilgrimage is to say, I am part of this story, this people, this sacred journey. Without such shared acts of devotion, identity dissolves. With them, it endures across centuries. Even in modern secular societies, identity-defining beliefs thrive. Consider the fierce loyalty some people feel toward political ideologies, sports teams, or even dietary movements like veganism or carnivorism. Outsiders may scoff at the intensity of these commitments, but insiders see them as defining who they are. A sports fan painting their face in team colors is not just supporting a game, they are proclaiming identity. A political activist defending a controversial policy is not merely arguing facts, they are defending the tribe to which they belong. This reveals a critical truth. Belief need not be religious to function like religion. Any idea that binds people into a community, shapes their sense of self, and provides rituals of belonging can operate with the same power as ancient faiths. Whether it is the chanting of hymns in a temple, the singing of an anthem at a stadium, or the rallying cry of a protest march, belief molds identity. But this power is double-edged. When identity is rooted in belief, questioning that belief can feel impossible. To doubt the doctrine is to doubt oneself. To abandon the ritual is to risk losing family, friends, and community. This is why many people, even when privately troubled by the logic of their faith, remain publicly loyal. To leave is not just to walk away from an idea, it is to sever ties with an identity that has defined them since birth. History offers striking examples. In Japan, for centuries, the belief in the divine origin of the emperor was not only a matter of theology, but of national identity. To question it was not merely heretical, it was unpatriotic, even treasonous. Similarly, in medieval Europe, to doubt the church's teachings was to risk not only excommunication but social death, for community life revolved around the parish. In both cases, belief was inseparable from belonging. This is why outsiders often misunderstand absurd beliefs. They ask, how can rational people believe such things? But the real question is, what identity does this belief protect? For the believer, the truth of the doctrine matters less than the truth of the community it sustains. A sacred cow in India is not simply an animal, it is a living symbol of cultural continuity. A prophecy in a small sect is not just a prediction, it is a shared dream that defines the group's future. The endurance of such beliefs shows that logic alone cannot dissolve them. You cannot debate someone out of an identity. Facts may sway opinions, but they rarely dismantle belonging. This is why attempts to ridicule faith often fail. Mockery does not change identity, it hardens it. To attack a belief is to strengthen the walls of the community that holds it. And so we arrive at a paradox. The more irrational a belief may appear, the more fiercely it can serve as a marker of identity. Precisely because it defies logic, it demands loyalty. And loyalty, once declared, cements belonging. The community becomes a fortress against doubt, a sanctuary for those who would otherwise feel adrift in a world without certainty. Thus, belief is not just a set of doctrines, it is the architecture of identity. It tells people who they are, where they belong, and why their lives matter. Without it, many would feel like strangers in their own world. With it, they find a home, even if outsiders call that home absurd. The fear of questioning. Why doubt becomes dangerous in belief systems. When we think about religion or spiritual communities, we often picture them as safe spaces, places that bring comfort, connection, and meaning. But there's another side that's not always talked about, the way many groups handle doubt. In fact, in a lot of religious environments, simply asking a question can be seen as dangerous. And that's fascinating because in almost every other area of life, asking questions is how we learn. In school, we're taught to ask questions. In work, problem solving depends on asking questions. Even in relationships, healthy communication grows from questioning and clarifying. But in some faith systems, raising even a small doubt is treated as a sign of weakness, rebellion, or even moral failure. Why is that? Why does questioning become such a threat? To understand this, we need to look at both the psychology of belief and the way institutions protect themselves. First, let's consider the psychological side. Human beings don't just believe things with their minds. We attach our emotions, our identity, and our sense of safety to those beliefs. If you've been raised since childhood in a community that told you this is the absolute truth, then that belief becomes woven into who you are. It's not just an idea you agree with, it becomes part of your sense of self. So when someone questions it, even if that someone is you, it feels like a personal attack. It's like pulling a thread out of a tightly woven cloth. If you tug too hard, the whole fabric might unravel. That's why doubt feels scary. It threatens the foundation of not just what you believe, but who you believe yourself to be. And because the brain is wired to avoid fear, most people push away those doubts. Or, in some cases, religious leaders step in and teach people that doubt itself is sinful, that it's a temptation, or even a trick of evil forces. In Christianity, for example, doubt is sometimes described as the devil trying to pull you away from God. In certain Buddhist traditions, questioning the words of a revered teacher is seen as creating bad karma. In some Islamic sects, doubt is treated as a lack of faith that could endanger your soul. Across many cultures, the message is consistent. Doubt is not just bad, it's dangerous. From an institutional point of view, discouraging doubt makes perfect sense. Think about it. If you run an organization that depends on loyalty and obedience, the last thing you want is people asking too many questions. Questions lead to critical thinking. Critical thinking leads to evaluating inconsistencies. And once people see cracks in the system, they might leave. Or worse, they might convince others to leave with them. For many religious institutions, especially those that depend on financial support or large followings, doubt isn't just a personal matter, it's a potential threat to survival. We can see real world examples of this everywhere. In Jehovah's Witness communities, for instance, asking doctrinal questions can lead to being shunned. Members who publicly doubt official teachings risk losing their families and social circles overnight. In Scientology, questioning the teachings of L. Ron Hubbard can mark you as a suppressive person, someone to be avoided, cut off, and even targeted. In certain cult like Christian groups, young members are told that questioning the pastor's authority is the same as questioning God himself. The result? Many people learn to silence their doubts before they even form into words. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Doubt isn't always suppressed by force. In many cases, it's suppressed by love, by belonging, by the fear of losing relationships. Imagine being in a tight-knit community where everyone you love, your parents, your siblings, your closest friends, is part of the faith. If you start asking questions and people label you as drifting away or losing faith, you risk losing not just your belief system, but your entire social world. That's a heavy cost, and for many, it's too high. So they stay silent, even if their hearts are uneasy. Psychologists have a term for this: cognitive dissonance. It's the tension we feel when our beliefs don't quite match our reality. And to resolve that tension, people often convince themselves to ignore the evidence, to shut down questions, and to double down on the faith. Ironically, the very act of suppressing doubt can make belief even stronger, at least on the outside. On the inside, though, there's often a quiet storm of unspoken questions. This dynamic explains why, in some groups, the most devoted followers are also the ones who secretly wrestle with the most intense doubts. It's almost like the harder they try to silence their inner questions, the more those questions haunt them. But because they can't share them, they carry the burden alone. That isolation can lead to guilt, shame, or even mental health struggles. Yet, the community around them might never see it, because on the surface, they appear perfectly faithful. It's also worth noting that questioning doesn't have to destroy faith. In fact, some of the most respected thinkers in religious history, people like Augustine in Christianity, Al-Ghazali in Islam, or Nagarjuna in Buddhism, were great questioners. Their doubts led them to deeper insights, not less faith. But in many modern religious communities, this nuance gets lost. Leaders fear that doubt will spread like a virus, so they stamp it out before it can grow. Now let's step back for a moment. Imagine what it would look like if doubt were embraced instead of feared. If people could openly ask, why do we believe this? Or where did this teaching come from? Without being punished. That kind of openness might not destroy faith. It might actually strengthen it, because beliefs that can withstand questions are often more resilient than those that collapse under scrutiny. But that requires courage, both from leaders and from followers. And in many systems, courage like that comes at a high price. So why is this important for us to think about? Because it shows us the tension between two human needs: the need for certainty and the need for truth. Certainty gives us comfort. It helps us feel safe in an unpredictable world. Truth, on the other hand, requires us to question, to investigate, and sometimes to let go of comforting illusions. Many people live their whole lives choosing certainty over truth, and that's understandable. But it also means that countless individuals carry unanswered questions, unspoken doubts, and hidden struggles that shape their spiritual journeys in silence. And maybe that's where we, as outside observers, can develop some compassion. It's easy to mock unusual religious practices or call believers gullible. But when you realize how powerful the fear of questioning is, how it ties into identity, belonging, love, and security, you start to see why people cling so tightly to belief. Questioning feels like pulling the rug out from under your entire life. It's not just an intellectual exercise, it's an emotional earthquake. That's why, in so many traditions, doubt isn't just discouraged, it's demonized. And until we understand that mechanism, we can't fully grasp why some beliefs, no matter how strange they look from the outside, continue to survive with such intensity on the inside. The subtle power of silence. Let's pause for a moment and think about something that most of us rarely notice in our daily lives: silence. Not just the absence of noise, but true, intentional silence. In a world that constantly bombards us with notifications, opinions, advertisements, and endless chatter, silence can feel strange, sometimes even uncomfortable. Yet silence has always held a profound place in spiritual traditions, especially in Buddhism, where it is seen not as emptiness, but as fullness. It is in silence that we often hear the deepest truths, the ones that words cannot quite capture. If you look around, you'll notice how rare silence really is. Even when you're alone, you might keep the TV on in the background, scroll through social media, or play music just to avoid that empty space. Silence makes many people uneasy because it forces them to face themselves, their own thoughts, and sometimes their own pain. That's why most of us avoid it. We're afraid of what might surface. But in Buddhism, silence is not something to run from. It's something to embrace. It's a sacred space where wisdom arises naturally, without being forced. Think of the Buddha himself. After his great awakening under the Bodhi tree, he remained silent for days. Not because he didn't have anything to say, but because he understood that words could never fully express what he had realized. His silence was a teaching in itself. It showed that sometimes the deepest truths cannot be explained. They must be experienced directly. But let's bring this closer to your life. Imagine you're in an argument. Words fly back and forth, fueled by anger, ego, and the need to be right. What often makes the situation worse is not the disagreement itself, but the endless exchange of reactive words. Now imagine instead that you choose silence. Not silence filled with resentment, but silence filled with awareness. In that quiet space, you stop adding fuel to the fire. You give yourself and the other person room to breathe. That silence often speaks louder than any clever comeback could. It communicates peace, patience, and a refusal to escalate. Silence also allows us to listen more deeply, not just to others, but to ourselves. Most of the time, when someone is talking to us, we're already preparing our reply. We're not truly listening. But when we bring silence into the conversation, we start to hear not just the words, but the emotions, the unspoken needs, the human heart behind them. That kind of listening can heal relationships in ways arguments never could. And silence doesn't only apply to speaking. It applies to the noise of your own thoughts as well. Have you ever noticed how loud your mind can be? Constant judgments, endless worries, rehearsing the past, predicting the future. It's like a crowded marketplace in there. Silence doesn't mean forcing your mind to shut up. Instead, it means learning to observe your thoughts without getting caught up in them. You don't need to argue with your thoughts or chase them down. Just notice them. And gradually, like ripples settling on a pond, the mind becomes still. This is why so many Buddhist practices, like meditation and mindfulness, emphasize silence. They give us a way to step out of the mental noise and rediscover a kind of inner quiet that is always there, beneath the surface. And in that inner quiet, we often find clarity. We begin to see what really matters, what is just noise, and what actions align with compassion and wisdom. Now, you might be wondering, but how do I bring silence into my daily life when everything around me is so loud? The truth is, you don't need to run away to a mountain monastery to practice silence. You can start small. Maybe it's 5 minutes in the morning before you check your phone. Just sit quietly, breathe, and allow the silence to hold you. Maybe it's turning off the radio while driving and noticing the rhythm of your breath. Or maybe it's pausing in the middle of a conversation and really listening without rushing to fill the gap. Over time, these small moments of silence add up. They change the way you relate to the world. You stop reacting so quickly. You stop needing to prove yourself all the time. You stop being controlled by the noise of other people's opinions. Instead, you begin to anchor yourself in something deeper, an inner stillness that no one can take away. There's a saying in Zen, silence is better than holiness. What does that mean? It means silence itself can be a sacred teacher. You don't have to perform rituals or recite fancy words to touch something divine. Simply by sitting in silence, fully present, you are already in the presence of truth. Even modern science is beginning to recognize the value of silence. Studies show that periods of silence can lower stress, improve focus, and even help regenerate brain cells. In other words, silence is not just spiritually powerful, it's physically healing as well. It gives your nervous system a chance to reset. your mind a chance to declutter, and your heart a chance to soften. Let's be honest, choosing silence is not always easy. It takes courage to step away from the noise. It takes courage to not always have the last word, to not always fill the air with chatter, to not always distract yourself from discomfort. But if you practice it, even little by little, you'll discover that silence is not empty. It's full of peace, full of presence, full of truth. So maybe the next time you're caught in the noise of daily life, try this. Pause, breathe, and let silence speak. You might be surprised by how much it has to say. The mirage of certainty. One of the most insidious aspects of organized religion is its insistence on certainty. From a very young age, people are taught that there are answers, definite answers, to life's deepest questions. Who we are, why we exist, what happens after death, what is right, what is wrong. And not just answers, they are answers handed down by authority, answers that are supposedly unquestionable, absolute, and eternal. But here's the thing, certainty is a mirage. Life is not built on absolutes. It is built on exploration, adaptation, and understanding. Consider a child raised in a religious household. From the moment they can comprehend language, they are taught that God exists, that there is a heaven and a hell, that salvation depends on following specific rules, and that the stories in their holy book are ultimate truth. These beliefs are not presented as ideas to investigate. They are presented as unquestionable facts. And the child, lacking the tools to critically analyze such claims, accepts them as reality. Over time, this acceptance hardens into certainty. This certainty feels comfortable because it shields the child from doubt, from fear, from the unknown. But it comes at a cost. The cost is intellectual freedom. The cost is curiosity. The cost is the natural human capacity to question and discover. Because once certainty is imposed, asking why, or how do we know, becomes dangerous. Doubt is framed as sin, rebellion, or even betrayal. And from there, the mind stops exploring, stops growing, stops challenging assumptions. The child grows into an adult who may never think beyond the boundaries of inherited beliefs. And yet, life is inherently uncertain. The universe does not hand us answers on a silver platter. Stars explode, diseases arise, societies crumble, people die unexpectedly. Nothing in existence is permanent or guaranteed. Yet religion presents certainty as if it were a refuge from all this uncertainty. It is a kind of psychological insurance. Believe these things, follow these rules, and you will be safe, eternally. But no amount of obedience can alter the randomness of existence. It is an illusion, a comforting story we are conditioned to accept. Even worse, this certainty creates conflict. When you are absolutely certain that your beliefs are correct, it becomes nearly impossible to see the validity of others' perspectives. This is why religions often clash with each other. It's not just about different practices, it's about the belief that one path holds the exclusive truth. And if your path is right, theirs must be wrong. This black and white thinking, this need for absolute certainty, has fueled centuries of wars, persecution, and intolerance. It creates enemies where there could be dialogue. It sows division where there could be understanding. Certainty also corrodes morality. If you believe with absolute conviction that your framework defines right and wrong, you are more likely to justify actions that harm others in the name of righteousness. History is filled with examples: crusades, inquisitions, holy wars, and systemic oppression. When moral authority is handed down as absolute, questioning it becomes unthinkable. And when questioning is unthinkable, injustice thrives. Even within individuals, certainty can be limiting. Imagine someone who follows all the rules, accepts every teaching, and never doubts. On the surface, this seems virtuous, but underneath, their thinking is constrained. They are living inside a cage built by others' fears and imaginations. Their capacity for empathy, for nuanced reasoning, for personal moral development is stunted. They are obedient, not wise. They are compliant, not enlightened. Contrast this with uncertainty. Uncertainty is uncomfortable, yes, but it is fertile. It forces us to look closely at our assumptions, to question our biases, and to refine our understanding. When we acknowledge that we don't know everything, we open ourselves to learning, to dialogue, and to growth. Uncertainty does not paralyze us, it empowers us. It invites curiosity instead of blind submission. Consider science. Every scientific discovery begins with uncertainty. Every theory is provisional, open to challenge, revision, or rejection. Scientists don't claim absolute truth, they claim the best understanding based on evidence. And yet, because science embraces uncertainty, it can grow, adapt, and progress. Religion, in contrast, often demands certainty and discourages questioning, which limits its ability to evolve or correct itself. But here's a crucial point. Embracing uncertainty does not mean abandoning values or meaning. You can live ethically, compassionately, and purposefully without clinging to absolute answers. You can explore morality, reason, and empathy while accepting that life is complex and unpredictable. In fact, this approach can create a deeper, more authentic form of morality, one rooted in understanding rather than fear, in curiosity rather than dogma, and in love rather than obligation. The danger of certainty also manifests in personal identity. Many people define themselves entirely by their religion, the rituals they perform, the community they belong to, the doctrines they follow. But when identity is rigidly tied to a set of unquestionable beliefs, it becomes fragile. Doubt threatens not just ideas, it threatens the self. And this is why many religious communities respond to questioning with ostracism, shame, or punishment. The system protects itself by conflating belief with identity, making it nearly impossible to separate the two without fear of loss. Even in adulthood, the mirage of certainty continues to influence our choices. Careers, politics, education, and relationships can all be filtered through the lens of unshakable beliefs. Decisions are made not based on evidence, empathy, or experience, but on pre-packaged doctrines. And over time, this rigid thinking can prevent people from adapting to new realities, learning from mistakes, or understanding perspectives beyond their own. Certainty, in this sense, is a trap disguised as security. So, what's the alternative? How do we live in a world full of uncertainty without being paralyzed by it? Buddhism provides a simple but profound answer. Embrace the unknown with awareness, curiosity, and compassion. Accept that life is a series of questions rather than a series of predetermined answers. Observe your beliefs critically, test them against experience, allow them to evolve, and understand that moral and spiritual growth comes not from blind certainty, but from reflection, understanding, and engagement with reality. The paradox is clear. Certainty feels safe, but it can imprison you. Uncertainty feels uncomfortable, but it can set you free. The more you allow yourself to live in this open space, the more you realize that you don't need anyone else to dictate what is true for you. You begin to trust your own reasoning, your own experience, and your own compassion. And in that trust, you find freedom, not the illusion of safety, but the real, unshakable kind. Ultimately, the mirage of certainty is a lesson. It shows us how much of our mental and emotional life is shaped by inherited beliefs and external authority. It challenges us to wake up, to see clearly, and to take responsibility for our own understanding. And while this path may be difficult, it is also empowering. It is a path towards self-respect, intellectual freedom, and moral authenticity. And here's the beautiful truth. Embracing uncertainty means chaos. It means possibility. It means engagement with the world as it is, not as someone else has scripted it. It means asking the hard questions, living with the discomfort, and yet continuing forward with curiosity, empathy, and courage. The more you embrace this approach, the more you realize that life itself is a teacher, and that wisdom grows not from what we're told to believe, but from what we learn through experience, reflection, and honest questioning. The illusion of divine morality. One of the most persistent claims of organized religion is that it provides a moral compass, a clear guide for distinguishing right from wrong. But if we examine this claim closely, it quickly becomes apparent that much of what religions present as divine morality is inconsistent, culturally relative, and often outdated. Morality, in the religious sense, is rarely universal. Instead, it reflects the biases, fears, and social norms of the time and place in which it originated. Take the holy texts, for example. They are treated as the words of an omniscient being, yet when read critically, they often reveal contradictions, moral inconsistencies, and practices that modern society would find deeply troubling. In some traditions, moral behavior requires covering one's head or avoiding certain foods. In others, morality is defined by strict punishments, including violence for perceived transgressions. Some teachings condemn harmless activities like dancing or drawing. Others prescribe harsh penalties for behaviors we now understand as human rights issues. These are not universal truths. They are cultural rules elevated to divine status. This inconsistency raises a crucial question. If morality comes from a divine source, why does it change so dramatically across cultures and eras? Why did ancient societies condone slavery, child marriage, or blood sacrifices under the guise of righteousness? If a god's morality were absolute, would it not transcend these temporal and cultural limitations? The answer seems clear. Morality evolves through human understanding, empathy, and experience, not through ancient scriptures. Organized religion often pretends otherwise, using the authority of tradition to enforce rules that may no longer serve human well-being. Furthermore, divine morality is frequently tied to fear and obedience rather than ethical reflection. Believers are told that they must follow certain rules not necessarily because they are inherently good, but because disobedience will bring punishment, either in this life or the next. Morality based on fear, threats, or promises of reward is fundamentally different from morality based on empathy, understanding, and rational consideration. It encourages compliance, not character. It prioritizes ritual over reflection. It replaces internal moral judgment with external control. Consider the impact on personal conscience. When morality is dictated by authority, independent ethical thinking is discouraged. Questioning rules is framed as rebellion. Failing to obey is framed as sin. Children grow up learning to follow instructions rather than to critically evaluate them. Adults continue this pattern, often without realizing that their ethical choices are influenced more by fear of punishment or desire for reward than by true moral reasoning. This is not morality. It is control masquerading as virtue. The illusion of divine morality also perpetuates division. Each religion claims its moral framework is correct, and by implication, those who follow other paths are wrong, sinful, or misguided. This mindset fosters intolerance, suspicion, and even hostility. History provides countless examples: wars fought in the name of God, inquisitions that punished dissenters, and contemporary conflicts where belief or disbelief can determine life or death. Religious morality, when enforced as absolute and unquestionable, becomes a tool for social control rather than a guide for ethical behavior. Even when religions appear to encourage compassion or kindness, the application is often conditional. Acts of charity may be tied to conversion or compliance. Help may be given, but only within the framework dictated by authority. Love, generosity, and empathy are celebrated, but only when expressed according to prescribed norms. Outside those norms, these virtues are punished or dismissed. True morality, rooted in empathy, fairness, and understanding, cannot thrive in such a system. Contrast this with secular or philosophical approaches to ethics. Morality need not be dictated by divine command. It can emerge from reflection, experience, and reason. Empathy, fairness, and concern for well-being provide a far more consistent and adaptable moral compass than any ancient text. Laws, social norms, and ethical discussions exist precisely because humans recognize the complexity of life and the need for ongoing evaluation. Morality evolves as we evolve. It grows through dialogue, evidence, and understanding, not through static decrees from the past. Another critical point is the way religious morality handles doubt. Questioning ethical principles within a religious framework is often discouraged, punished, or treated as weakness. This creates a culture in which people may follow moral rules superficially without truly understanding or internalizing them. Blind adherence may appear virtuous, but it does not cultivate genuine moral insight. The individual becomes a vessel for tradition rather than an independent moral agent. Religious claims of divine morality also create what can be called moral outsourcing. Believers are encouraged to defer their ethical judgment to an external authority, God, Scripture, or religious leaders. While this can simplify decision-making, it also absolves individuals of responsibility for their actions. If something goes wrong, the blame is shifted to divine will or institutional rules. This dependency undermines personal growth, critical thinking, and ethical accountability. History, once again, shows the consequences. Societies that unquestioningly followed religious rules often perpetuated oppression, violence, and injustice. Leaders exploited moral claims to maintain power and suppress dissent. Practices once considered sacred, such as punishing women for minor transgressions, ostracizing minority groups, or waging wars against other faiths, highlight the dangers of uncritical adherence to supposedly divine morality. In many cases, progress occurred not through religion, but despite it. Abolitionists, human rights advocates, and social reformers often faced resistance from religious authorities while fighting for ethical advancement. Even today, conflicts over morality continue to cause harm. Issues such as gender equality, LGBTQ rights, reproductive rights, and scientific education often meet religious opposition. This resistance is not incidental, it is structural. Organized religion, by claiming unchangeable authority, cannot easily admit error without risking the foundation of its entire system. As a result, dogma is preserved at the expense of justice, equity, and well-being. And yet, for all its inconsistencies, religion continues to claim moral authority. Why? Because certainty and authority reinforce one another. The promise of divine morality offers comfort, stability, and a sense of purpose. People cling to the idea that their actions are aligned with ultimate truth, that obedience ensures cosmic approval. But comfort built on unquestioned authority is fragile. It discourages genuine understanding, suppresses critical thinking, and undermines the very ethical autonomy it purports to cultivate. In reality, morality does not require divinity. Ethical behavior, compassion, and fairness can and do exist outside religious frameworks. People can be profoundly moral without adhering to any organized faith, guided instead by empathy, reason, and experience. Moreover, secular approaches to ethics are adaptable. They can respond to new knowledge, new challenges, and evolving social understanding. Religious morality, when rigidly enforced, cannot. Ultimately, the illusion of divine morality is a tool of control. It convinces individuals that they must submit to external authority to be good, to find meaning, or to secure eternal reward. It conflates obedience with virtue and tradition with truth, and it shields its own assumptions from scrutiny, ensuring that power remains concentrated, unquestioned, and often unaccountable. By recognizing this illusion, by questioning inherited moral claims, we reclaim our ethical autonomy. We begin to understand that morality is not a fixed gift handed down from above, but a living, evolving practice grounded in awareness, empathy, and reflection. And in doing so, we free ourselves from the constraints of dogma, moving toward a more authentic, compassionate, and thoughtful way of living. The rigidity of dogma and the cost of fear. Another core issue with organized religion is its rigidity. Unlike science or philosophy, which evolved through inquiry, observation, and debate, religious systems often demand unquestioning adherence to established doctrine. Dogma is presented as absolute truth, not subject to revision or reinterpretation. To doubt it is considered dangerous, even sinful. This rigidity stifles curiosity, discourages independent thought, and creates a culture of fear. Fear is one of religion's most effective tools. It operates on multiple levels. Fear of punishment in this life, fear of eternal damnation, fear of social ostracism, and fear of divine disapproval. From a young age, believers are taught that questioning rules, challenging authority, or seeking alternative perspectives could result in grave consequences. Children grow up internalizing these fears, often without realizing how deeply they shape their thoughts, choices, and behaviors. Fear becomes an invisible chain, binding the mind long before reason can develop fully. Consider the psychological implications. Living under constant fear, whether of hellfire, divine judgment, or social exclusion, creates chronic stress. It trains individuals to suppress curiosity and conform to external expectations rather than to explore ethical, spiritual, or intellectual questions on their own terms. Obedience replaces insight. Rituals and repetitive prayers may provide temporary comfort, but they also reinforce submission and inhibit critical reflection. In this way, fear is not just a byproduct of religion. It is a central mechanism for maintaining control. Religious dogma often justifies its rigidity by claiming to protect believers from the unknown. The ways of God are mysterious, adherents are told. You cannot understand the divine plan. While humility before the unknown can be healthy, this type of instruction discourages inquiry under the guise of piety. It presents curiosity as hubris, making doubt seem immoral. The result is that adherents are conditioned to accept answers without evidence and to suppress the natural human desire to question and explore. The consequences extend beyond the individual to society at large. Dogmatic adherence can prevent moral and social progress. Laws, educational systems, and cultural norms influenced by rigid religious principles often lag behind scientific understanding and ethical evolution. Consider medical advancements, reproductive rights, gender equality, and LGBTQ+ issues. In many regions, religious authority has delayed or resisted progress in these areas, citing sacred texts or divine command as justification. This resistance isn't accidental. It is built into the structure of organized religion, which relies on maintaining established hierarchies and traditions. History demonstrates the high cost of dogma. During the medieval period, individuals who challenged religious authority, scientists, philosophers, reformers, faced persecution, imprisonment, or death. The suppression of knowledge and dissent was framed as protection of divine truth, yet it frequently hindered human understanding and innovation. Even today, in some parts of the world, questioning religious norms carries social, legal, or personal risk. Apostasy, heresy, or even the appearance of doubt can result in ostracism, violence, or loss of livelihood. The cost of independent thought remains uncomfortably high, and the lesson is clear. Conformity is rewarded, questioning is punished. Religious dogma also limits spiritual exploration. Many people seek meaning, purpose, or a sense of transcendence, yet organized religion often prescribes exactly how these experiences should occur. Meditation, prayer, or ritual are framed in narrowly defined ways. Deviation is discouraged or condemned. The result is that individuals may feel spiritually constrained, unable to explore their own relationship with existence or consciousness freely. Religion promises freedom, but in practice, it often offers a highly curated and limited version of spiritual experience. The tension between rigidity and the human need for exploration is apparent in countless personal stories. People raised within strict religious frameworks frequently describe a sense of guilt or confusion when confronted with alternative perspectives. The teachings they internalized as absolute suddenly clash with reality, evidence, or their own moral instincts. Navigating this conflict can be painful, often requiring individuals to leave the structures that once defined them. This departure is not moral failure. It is an exercise of critical thinking, self-determination, and intellectual courage. Yet religious culture often frames such choices as betrayal or weakness, intensifying emotional turmoil. Another aspect of rigidity is the way religion handles change. Scientific discoveries, social evolution, and cultural shifts often challenge religious narratives. Rather than adapting, many religious institutions resist or reinterpret these challenges in ways that preserve authority rather than truth. Copernicus's heliocentric model, Darwin's theory of evolution, and modern medical knowledge all faced, or still face, religious opposition in some circles. This resistance is not incidental. It is structural. Religion prioritizes preservation of tradition over engagement with new evidence. It teaches adherence to established stories rather than responsiveness to reality. Religious dogma also manipulates emotions to reinforce obedience. Guilt, shame, and fear are leveraged to maintain loyalty. Believers are reminded of their sins, imperfections, and mortal frailty, then offered a path to salvation, conditional on compliance. This emotional cycle reinforces dependence on authority, making it psychologically difficult to question the system. Individuals internalize a narrative in which freedom, morality, and purpose are available only through submission. The irony is stark. A system that claims to offer liberation often binds adherents more tightly than any external force could. Moreover, dogma obscures the distinction between faith and knowledge. Believers are encouraged to equate devotion with understanding, obedience with insight. The more unquestioning one is, the more faithful one is deemed. Yet, in all other domains of life, science, education, ethics, truth is tested, challenged, and refined through evidence and discussion. Blind adherence is not strength, it is vulnerability. Religion flips this expectation, rewarding certainty without evidence and discouraging inquiry that might undermine authority. Ultimately, the rigidity of organized religion constrains the mind, the spirit, and society. It stifles curiosity, suppresses ethical growth, and reinforces hierarchical control. By demanding submission and discouraging exploration, it creates a culture where fear is internalized and independent thought is devalued. Yet this rigidity is not a necessary feature of human spirituality or morality. It is a product of tradition, authority, and self-preservation. Recognizing this is liberating. It allows individuals to separate the pursuit of meaning from rigid structures, to question inherited beliefs without fear, and to develop ethics grounded in reason, empathy, and experience. Real spiritual growth requires freedom, freedom to doubt, to explore, and to evolve. By confronting the constraints of dogma, one can reclaim agency over one's mind, morality, and life. The illusion of divine authority. A recurring theme in organized religion is the assertion of divine authority. Religious institutions often claim to speak for an all-knowing, omnipotent creator. Priests, imams, rabbis, and other religious leaders are treated as intermediaries between humans and the divine. This claim of authority is rarely questioned within the system. Adherents are encouraged to trust leaders implicitly, assuming that their teachings, interpretations, and instructions carry the weight of ultimate truth. Yet when you look closer, these leaders are human beings, subject to biases, ignorance, and error. They are trained not in empirical investigation or ethical reasoning, but in memorization of doctrine and enforcement of conformity. Their authority is not earned through discovery or insight. It is inherited or conferred by hierarchy. They are rewarded for maintaining tradition, not for questioning it. And while some may genuinely seek wisdom, the structure of organized religion ensures that authority remains centralized, unquestioned, and largely insulated from accountability. The consequences of this illusion are profound. Followers are encouraged to relinquish personal judgment in favor of prescribed interpretations. Complex moral and philosophical questions are simplified into prepackaged answers, often divorced from context or human experience. Instead of exploring the nuances of ethics, justice, or existence, believers are instructed to accept rules and narratives as absolute. This substitution of obedience for understanding is one of the most significant ways religion controls thought. Consider education within religious contexts. Many institutions prioritize doctrinal instruction over critical thinking, scientific literacy, or philosophical inquiry. Students learn what to believe rather than how to think. They are taught to memorize sacred texts and adhere to rituals, but rarely to analyze, critique, or test ideas against evidence. The implicit message is that truth is preordained, not discovered, and that questioning authority is both unnecessary and dangerous. Religious authority also perpetuates hierarchy. Leaders hold disproportionate influence over community decisions, legal norms, and cultural practices. This influence extends to law, family life, healthcare, and politics in many societies. Rules that affect daily living, personal relationships, and societal structures are dictated by interpretations of sacred texts rather than reasoned debate. Even when scientific or ethical knowledge conflicts with doctrine, authority is maintained, often under the guise of divine mandate. This illusion is further reinforced by social pressures. Communities of believers create environments where conformity is rewarded and dissent punished. Questioning the leader, the doctrine, or the institution can result in ostracism, shame, or even danger. These pressures make it psychologically difficult for individuals to think independently. The combination of hierarchical authority and social reinforcement ensures that challenges to doctrine are minimized and often silenced entirely. Another manifestation of divine authority is the enforcement of morality through supernatural claims. Believers are told that a higher power judges every action, thought, and intention. This omnipresent surveillance fosters guilt, fear, and self-policing. People internalize these messages, monitoring their behavior and thoughts in anticipation of divine approval or punishment. Obedience becomes a form of psychological control disguised as virtue. Real ethical development, rooted in empathy, reasoning, and mutual respect, is often secondary to maintaining compliance with externally imposed standards. Moreover, the claim of divine authority creates contradictions. Different religions, and even different leaders within the same religion, make incompatible claims about morality, truth, and the nature of the divine. Some portray God as loving and forgiving, others as wrathful and judgmental. Some emphasize mercy, others punishment. These contradictions are often explained away as mystery or divine plan, discouraging critical engagement. Followers are taught to accept inconsistency as sacred, which normalizes cognitive dissonance rather than encouraging reasoned understanding. The illusion of authority also supports economic and political power. Religious leaders and institutions often control substantial resources, including land, wealth, and donations. These assets are justified as divinely sanctioned, creating a moral framework that shields the accumulation of power from scrutiny. While some religious organizations perform charitable work, such contributions are frequently conditional, tied to conformity, loyalty, or conversion. Economic influence reinforces spiritual authority, and spiritual authority reinforces economic influence, a cycle that entrenches power over generations. History is full of examples where claims of divine authority led to harm. Wars, persecution, and systemic oppression have all been justified in the name of God. Leaders claiming divine sanction have enforced laws that restrict personal freedom, punish dissent, and discriminate against marginalized groups. Religious authority has often conflicted with reason, science, and justice, yet adherents are taught to accept these conflicts as part of a higher plan. Questioning this authority is seen as rebellion against both God and society. This illusion is dangerous because it discourages skepticism, critical thinking, and independent moral judgment. Believers may adhere to harmful practices, support unjust policies, or ignore evidence of injustice, all because authority has framed compliance as a moral imperative. Faith, obedience, and loyalty are elevated above reason, evidence, and compassion. The more unquestioning the followers, the stronger the authority remains. However, recognizing this illusion is empowering. When individuals understand that religious leaders are human and that claimed divine authority is not evidence of truth, they regain agency over their own moral, intellectual, and spiritual development. They can separate ethical reasoning from hierarchical command, explore questions without fear, and evaluate claims based on evidence and reason rather than tradition or coercion. Freedom from the illusion of divine authority opens the door to genuine understanding, compassion, and innovation. Ultimately, the claim of divine authority is less about truth and more about control. It centralizes power, maintains conformity, and discourages independent thought. It replaces exploration with obedience, curiosity with submission, and ethical reasoning with ritual compliance. By challenging this claim, by asking questions, seeking evidence, and thinking independently, individuals can reclaim autonomy over their beliefs and actions. The broader lesson is clear. Authority should be earned, not assumed. Ethical and spiritual guidance should be grounded in evidence, reason, and compassion, not ancient stories or hierarchical power structures. True wisdom does not require blind obedience. It thrives in dialogue, inquiry, and the continuous pursuit of understanding. Recognizing the human foundations of religious authority is a critical step toward intellectual freedom and moral clarity. Religion and the illusion of morality. A common argument in favor of organized religion is that it provides a moral compass, a guide for distinguishing right from wrong. But a closer examination reveals that morality within religious systems is often inconsistent, culturally contingent, and dependent on adherence rather than understanding. Rules about behavior, thought, and ritual vary dramatically across traditions and historical periods. What is considered virtuous in one religion may be condemned in another. Dietary laws, gender norms, sexual restrictions, and social hierarchies differ not because of universal truth, but because of local customs and the interpretations of religious authorities. The inconsistency of religious morality exposes a critical problem. If moral guidance depends on obedience to rules rather than ethical reasoning, it is arbitrary. People may follow commandments out of fear of punishment, hope for reward, or desire for social acceptance, rather than genuine compassion or understanding. This raises the question, is morality based on fear or reward really morality, or is it compliance? True ethical behavior arises from empathy, reasoning, and an understanding of consequences, not from memorizing ancient rules written by humans who lacked scientific knowledge and lived in entirely different social contexts. History provides clear evidence of the limitations of religiously imposed morality. Slavery, caste systems, gender inequality, and punitive justice systems were once considered divinely sanctioned. Entire populations were subjugated under the guise of obedience to God. Religious texts often codified practices that today are universally recognized as unethical. Yet, adherents believed these actions were moral because authority said so. Progress in human morality did not come from religion. It came from questioning authority, challenging dogma, and prioritizing reason and empathy over rote obedience. Even today, religious morality often clashes with contemporary ethics. Issues such as LGBTQ rights, gender equality, reproductive freedom, and scientific education are frequently opposed by institutions claiming moral authority derived from sacred texts. The reasoning is not rooted in universal human welfare, but in tradition and authority. As a result, individuals are taught to defer moral judgment to a hierarchy, rather than cultivating the skills necessary to evaluate ethical dilemmas independently. This reliance on authority creates a dangerous rigidity. Ethical understanding evolves as societies learn from experience, reason, and reflection. Slavery, child marriage, and other harmful practices were abandoned not because of religious edict, but because human understanding progressed. Religions, in contrast, resist change. They cling to rituals, doctrines, and interpretations, often citing divine perfection as justification for maintaining outdated norms. Admission of error threatens institutional authority, so dogma is protected at all costs. Another critical issue is that morality is frequently weaponized. Religious systems often define insiders and outsiders, righteous and heretic, saved and damned. This binary categorization fosters tribalism and justifies harm toward those labeled as enemies. Wars, persecution, and systemic discrimination have historically been justified on the grounds of moral or spiritual authority. Individuals are compelled to act against others, not because empathy or justice dictates, but because religious law or doctrine mandates it. The result is a morality that serves power rather than human well-being. Prayer, rituals, and ritualized behavior are often presented as evidence of moral or spiritual adherence. Believers are encouraged to perform acts of devotion to secure divine favor, atone for sin, or attain salvation. Yet these behaviors rarely correlate with actual ethical outcomes. People may pray while committing acts of harm, give donations with expectations of reward, or follow dietary restrictions while ignoring injustice in their communities. Morality becomes performative, divorced from genuine understanding, and tied to ritual compliance rather than ethical responsibility. Religious morality is also selective. Texts often emphasize certain virtues while neglecting others. Charity, forgiveness, and love are highlighted, but so are obedience, exclusion, and punishment. Ethical guidance is filtered through historical and cultural biases of the authors. Talking animals, divine commands for genocide, and instructions for slavery are embedded alongside principles of kindness. Adherents are left to reconcile contradictions or rationalize violence and injustice as divinely sanctioned. This selective moral system raises fundamental questions about the nature of ethics. If morality is absolute, why is it inconsistent across cultures and religions? Moreover, the claim that religion is necessary for morality is itself insulting. Humans exhibit empathy, fairness, and cooperation naturally. People act decently, not because of fear of hell or hope for paradise, but because of human reasoning, compassion, and shared social norms. Many of the greatest moral advancements, abolition of slavery, human rights movements, scientific progress, were achieved by individuals who questioned religious authority. Far from needing religion to be ethical, human morality often thrives in spite of religious constraints. Religious morality also discourages personal growth. Followers are told that divine laws are perfect and immutable, which suppresses curiosity and critical evaluation. Ethical dilemmas are simplified into rigid codes of conduct, preventing nuanced understanding. Questioning these codes is often framed as sinful or rebellious, stifling independent thought. In contrast, moral development requires reflection, dialogue, and the willingness to learn from mistakes. When morality is dictated rather than explored, ethical growth is hindered. Another danger arises when morality is tied to fear of punishment or hope for reward. Compliance is achieved not through understanding or empathy, but through coercion and manipulation. This produces individuals who may behave morally in appearance, but whose actions are motivated by self-interest or avoidance of negative consequences. True morality, however, is resilient. It persists even when no reward is offered, even when no authority is watching, and even when acting ethically is inconvenient or risky. Religion, by substituting fear and ritual for reflection and understanding, undermines this resilience. Finally, organized religion often conflates morality with authority. Behaving ethically is defined as following prescribed rules rather than developing independent judgment. Obedience is elevated above reason. Questioning doctrine is framed as moral weakness. Submission becomes a virtue, while curiosity, dissent, and critical thought are framed as vice. In this system, morality is externally imposed and internally policed through fear, guilt, and social pressure, rather than arising from genuine understanding or empathy. The takeaway is clear. Organized religion is not a necessary foundation for moral behavior. Ethics can and do exist independently of doctrine, ritual, or divine authority. Compassion, fairness, and justice arise from human understanding, reflection, and empathy. True morality is not a product of obedience to authority, but of reasoned choice and conscious effort. Recognizing this distinction allows individuals to reclaim their ethical agency, think critically about right and wrong, and engage with the world in a morally responsible way without relying on outdated traditions or hierarchical commands. Religion and the suppression of knowledge. One of the most significant consequences of organized religion is its historical role in suppressing knowledge and intellectual inquiry. While some argue that religion inspires curiosity and moral reflection, the evidence suggests that organized belief systems often prioritize obedience over exploration, dogma over discovery, and faith over evidence. Throughout history, institutions claiming divine authority have frequently resisted scientific progress, censored ideas, and punished those who sought understanding beyond prescribed boundaries. The suppression of knowledge is not a marginal issue. It is a structural feature of organized religion. Religious authorities often claim to possess ultimate truth, presenting sacred texts and doctrines as infallible. This claim inherently discourages questioning. Any challenge to religious teachings is framed not merely as disagreement, but as rebellion against the divine order. In such a system, intellectual curiosity is discouraged, and independent thought becomes a potential threat. The moment a scholar or thinker asks a question that contradicts sacred authority, they risk excommunication, social ostracism, or even death. Historical examples abound. During the European Middle Ages, the Catholic Church controlled access to knowledge and education. Scientific observation that contradicted scripture, such as heliocentrism, was met with persecution. Galileo Galilei, for instance, was tried and placed under house arrest for advocating that the earth revolves around the sun, a reality that challenged the religiously sanctioned worldview of the time. His discoveries were suppressed not because they were incorrect, but because they undermined the authority of the church. Similarly, in various cultures, religious institutions have resisted advancements in medicine, astronomy, biology, and physics. The understanding of disease, for example, was hindered for centuries by beliefs attributing illness to divine punishment or demonic possession. Instead of encouraging empirical investigation, religious authorities often enforced rituals, prayers, or superstitions as remedies, delaying the development of modern medicine and public health. The consequences were real. Millions suffered and died because adherence to dogma took precedence over inquiry and evidence-based solutions. The suppression of knowledge is also evident in education. Religious institutions historically controlled curricula, dictating what could be taught and what was forbidden. Certain texts, ideas, or philosophies were banned because they challenged theological assumptions. Intellectual freedom was sacrificed in favor of doctrinal conformity. Students were trained to memorize and obey, not to reason and question. In this environment, curiosity is replaced with indoctrination, and learning becomes a tool of control rather than empowerment. Even today, religion continues to influence educational content in many regions. Topics such as evolution, reproductive health, and scientific reasoning are often omitted, distorted, or replaced with religious doctrine. Young minds are taught to defer to authority rather than to critically analyze evidence. This legacy of intellectual suppression perpetuates a cycle. Generations grow up accepting dogma without question, and the system maintains its control over knowledge and thought. The contrast between science and religious authority illustrates the fundamental difference between inquiry and dogma. Science thrives on doubt, experimentation, and correction. Errors are expected, debated, and corrected through evidence. Knowledge evolves because every claim must withstand scrutiny. Religion, by contrast, often discourages scrutiny and discourages acknowledging error. Questions are answered with platitudes, mysteries, or appeals to divine will rather than investigation. The result is stagnation. Intellectual development is subordinated to the maintenance of authority. Religious claims about the natural world are often demonstrably inaccurate. Sacred texts describe cosmologies based on the limited knowledge of their authors. Flat Earth theories, celestial bodies as holes in the sky, disease caused by demons, and other misconceptions. These texts were written in specific historical contexts and reflect human ignorance of the natural world at the time. Yet, when treated as infallible, they hinder scientific understanding rather than promoting it. Accepting these claims uncritically obstructs curiosity and discourages exploration of the universe as it is, rather than as imagined by ancient storytellers. The suppression of knowledge is also tied to control over social and political structures. Religious authorities have historically dictated not only what people believe, but how they live. Legal systems, societal norms, and governance were often shaped by religious doctrine, rather than reasoned policy. Challenging religious authority was perceived as threatening not only spiritually, but socially and politically. As a result, dissenters, scholars, and innovators frequently faced severe consequences, from exile to execution. Intellectual progress became entangled with risk, ensuring that conformity was rewarded and questioning punished. Furthermore, religion often frames curiosity as dangerous. Children and followers are taught that questioning sacred truths is sinful, that doubt is morally wrong, and that obedience equates to righteousness. This psychological conditioning reinforces submission and discourages exploration. Over time, entire societies internalize the idea that inquiry is morally suspect, replacing wonder and investigation with fear and conformity. The human drive to understand the world is systematically undermined in favor of maintaining a stable hierarchy of belief. Religion also misrepresents the nature of truth. By claiming exclusive access to ultimate knowledge, religious systems create an illusion of certainty in areas where uncertainty is unavoidable. Life, the cosmos, and human experience are inherently complex, ambiguous, and constantly evolving. Religion, however, presents fixed answers: creation stories, moral laws, and divine mandates that are portrayed as eternal and immutable. This static approach conflicts with the dynamic process of learning, discovery, and critical thinking. The consequences extend beyond science and education. They shape societal attitudes toward progress, innovation, and human potential. Societies dominated by rigid religious authority often resist technological advancement, public health initiatives, and social reforms. Innovation is constrained when questioning foundational beliefs is forbidden. Communities that prioritize dogma over inquiry struggle to adapt to new challenges, and generations of critical thinkers are discouraged or punished. Finally, organized religion creates a psychological environment that conflates obedience with wisdom. Followers are trained to respect authority rather than evaluate evidence. Certainty is praised, doubt is condemned, and the act of thinking independently is framed as dangerous or sinful. By doing so, religion suppresses the human potential for understanding, creativity, and growth. It transforms natural curiosity into guilt-laden hesitation, curiosity into compliance, and inquiry into taboo. In conclusion, the historical and ongoing suppression of knowledge by organized religion highlights a fundamental tension. Religion seeks to maintain authority and control, while knowledge thrives on questioning and discovery. The insistence on dogma, obedience, and uncritical acceptance creates barriers to understanding, innovation, and intellectual freedom. While religion may offer community or comfort, it often does so at the cost of curiosity, evidence, and human progress. Recognizing this pattern allows individuals to reclaim their capacity for inquiry, embrace uncertainty, and pursue knowledge free from imposed limitations. Religion and the restriction of freedom. Organized religion is not just a system of belief. It is also a framework for controlling behavior, shaping thought, and regulating personal freedom. While proponents often present religion as a source of moral guidance, community, and comfort, the structure of many religious systems imposes strict limits on autonomy. From childhood through adulthood, followers are often conditioned to conform to prescribed norms, rituals, and beliefs, with noncompliance framed as sin, moral failure, or rebellion against the divine. This control extends to the most intimate aspects of life: what one can believe, who one can love, what one can read, and even how one can think. At the core of this restriction is the concept of obedience. Many religions emphasize that faithful individuals must submit to divine authority as interpreted by religious leaders. Obedience is elevated above ethical reasoning, compassion, or independent judgment. Rules are often arbitrary. What foods can be eaten, how the body should be adorned, who can marry whom, or when and how one may rest or work. The intent behind these rules is rarely to promote personal growth or societal well-being. Rather, it is to reinforce submission to authority. By normalizing obedience, religion subtly discourages self-determination and critical thought, making it difficult for individuals to act independently or question the system. From a young age, children in religious communities are taught that dissent is dangerous. Questioning the teachings of sacred texts or challenging the pronouncements of religious authorities is framed as morally wrong, spiritually dangerous, or socially unacceptable. This form of psychological conditioning trains individuals to internalize the rules of the religion as absolute truths. Over time, the boundaries of acceptable thought are narrowed, and curiosity or independent reasoning is suppressed. Even adults who attempt to question or leave the faith often face significant social and familial consequences: ostracism, shame, or loss of community. The restriction of personal freedom extends beyond thought into daily life and lifestyle choices. Religious authority often dictates norms around gender roles, sexuality, and personal relationships. Women, in particular, have historically been subjected to restrictive laws and cultural practices in the name of religious doctrine. Dress codes, restrictions on movement, and limitations on education and employment are often justified through appeals to sacred law. Likewise, LGBTQ individuals frequently face condemnation, exclusion, or even legal penalties in religious societies. These controls are rarely rooted in universal ethics or well-being. They are mechanisms to maintain conformity and reinforce the authority of the institution. Religious legal systems, such as Sharia law or canon law, exemplify the institutionalization of this control. When belief is codified into law, questioning the religion becomes a legal as well as moral issue. Apostasy, blasphemy, or failure to comply with religious mandates can be punishable by fines, imprisonment, or even death in some regions. The threat of punishment creates an environment in which obedience is not a matter of personal conviction, but of survival. Freedom is conditional. One is free only so long as one behaves in accordance with the dictates of the religious system. Any deviation, whether intellectual, moral, or personal, is met with severe consequences. Even in societies with legal protections for freedom of belief, religion can restrict freedom through social pressure and emotional coercion. Religious communities often employ guilt, shame, and fear to enforce compliance. Individuals are taught that disobedience could jeopardize their eternal salvation, divine favor, or social standing. Relationships and community bonds are leveraged to ensure conformity, making it psychologically difficult to act outside the prescribed norms. In this way, religion maintains influence even without legal authority, shaping behavior through internalized fear and moral obligation. The restriction of freedom is compounded by the control of knowledge. By limiting access to scientific understanding, historical evidence, and alternative philosophies, religious systems prevent individuals from making fully informed choices. Education often emphasizes memorization of doctrine rather than critical inquiry. Scientific discoveries, cultural perspectives, and ethical debates that challenge religious teachings are minimized, dismissed, or labeled as heretical. Without access to diverse sources of knowledge, people are less capable of questioning authority, evaluating evidence, or making independent moral judgments. Knowledge becomes subordinate to belief, reinforcing a cycle of control. Religion also dictates moral frameworks, claiming to provide the only valid system for determining right and wrong. While morality is essential for society, religious morality is often inconsistent, culturally contingent, and authoritarian rather than compassionate. Obedience is prized over empathy. Ritual compliance is valued over ethical reasoning. As a result, individuals may be forced to act in ways that conflict with their own understanding of justice, fairness, or human well-being. The internalization of these externally imposed moral codes restricts personal freedom by subordinating personal conscience to institutionalized dogma. Furthermore, religion frequently restricts freedom of expression. Speaking out against doctrine or questioning sacred texts can result in public condemnation, legal action, or social exile. Artists, writers, and thinkers throughout history have been censored, imprisoned, or executed for challenging religious orthodoxy. The suppression of dissenting voices creates a culture of self-censorship, where individuals limit their own speech and thought to avoid conflict with religious authority. This is not merely a limitation of action. It is a limitation of mind and creativity. Religious control also extends to family life. Parents are often encouraged to raise children according to the faith, teaching obedience and submission from an early age. Children are rarely given the opportunity to choose their beliefs independently. They inherit moral and spiritual frameworks without critical evaluation, and leaving the faith later in life can result in familial estrangement. In this sense, freedom is postponed until adulthood, but even then, social and psychological pressures often maintain conformity. Ultimately, organized religion functions as a system that defines freedom on its own terms. One is free only so long as one obeys, conforms, and submits. The moment an individual exercises independent thought, challenges authority, or rejects prescribed beliefs, freedom is restricted or revoked. This conditional liberty is disguised as spiritual guidance, moral clarity, or divine protection, but in practice, it serves to maintain control. True freedom, freedom of thought, inquiry, conscience, and action, is constrained within these religious frameworks. In conclusion, the restriction of freedom is a central mechanism through which organized religion maintains power. By enforcing obedience, shaping thought, controlling knowledge, and dictating moral and social norms, religion limits autonomy at both individual and societal levels. While it may provide comfort, structure, and community, it often does so by curbing intellectual curiosity, personal choice, and self-determination. Recognizing these patterns is essential for reclaiming autonomy, cultivating independent thought, and building a society in which freedom is genuine, not conditional. The path to true liberty requires questioning authority, exploring diverse perspectives, and embracing the uncertainties and complexities of human experience without fear of spiritual reprisal. Religion, wealth, and political power. Organized religion is not just a system of belief or moral guidance. It is also a complex institution intertwined with economic and political power. Beyond shaping thought and behavior, religions have historically accumulated vast wealth and influence, often using these resources to maintain control over followers and society at large. The combination of spiritual authority and material power creates a unique dynamic. Religion is presented as a source of moral guidance, yet it often functions as a mechanism for social, political, and financial control. Throughout history, religious institutions have amassed considerable economic resources. From ancient temples and monasteries to modern megachurches, the wealth generated by donations, tithes, and political patronage is enormous. In many cases, these funds are used to sustain hierarchical structures, fund grand buildings, support religious leaders, and extend influence over communities. The accumulation of wealth is rarely questioned because it is framed as sacred or divinely sanctioned. Followers are encouraged to give generously, often sacrificing their own economic stability to support institutions that claim moral authority. This economic power is closely tied to political influence. Religious institutions have historically aligned with ruling elites, using faith as a tool to legitimize authority. Monarchs, emperors, and governments have sought the endorsement of religious leaders to reinforce their own rule, while religious authorities have leveraged political alliances to expand their influence. Laws, policies, and governance structures have often reflected religious doctrine, dictating what citizens may do, how they should behave, and who is granted rights. Even in modern democratic societies, religious lobbying and political endorsements continue to shape legislation, education, and social norms. The financial and political reach of organized religion allows it to dictate more than just spiritual matters. It can influence healthcare policies, education curricula, marriage laws, and social services. In some regions, religious authorities decide what medical treatments are permissible, what books can be taught in schools, and what behaviors are legally punishable. By controlling access to knowledge, shaping law, and guiding public morality, religious institutions wield power that rivals or surpasses secular authorities. This is not merely symbolic. It directly affects the freedoms, rights, and opportunities of individuals. One notable consequence of this concentration of wealth and power is economic exploitation. Followers are often encouraged or required to donate substantial portions of their income to religious institutions, sometimes under the promise of spiritual rewards, divine favor, or moral obligation. This creates a system in which devotion is financially commodified. The more one gives, the more one is perceived as faithful, regardless of personal circumstances or ethical considerations. In extreme cases, religious institutions amass wealth far beyond what is necessary for communal support, maintaining lavish lifestyles for leaders while ordinary believers face economic hardship. Religious authority also often intersects with social hierarchies. Leaders who control wealth and influence can enforce obedience not just through moral or spiritual arguments, but through social pressure and economic dependency. In tightly knit religious communities, those who question doctrine or fail to contribute financially may be ostracized, shunned, or excluded from essential resources. Economic control becomes a means of regulating behavior, ensuring that the institution's influence extends beyond belief into tangible aspects of daily life. The political dimension of organized religion further reinforces control. By influencing government policies, religious institutions can codify their doctrines into law, often imposing moral rules on the wider population. Laws governing marriage, reproductive rights, freedom of expression, education, and social conduct frequently reflect religious imperatives rather than universal ethical principles. This intertwining of religion and politics blurs the line between spiritual guidance and social coercion. Citizens may be expected to follow rules rooted in ancient doctrine, even when these rules conflict with modern understanding, human rights, or personal conscience. Religious influence on politics is not always benign. History is filled with examples where religious power has justified wars, persecution, and systemic inequality. Crusades, inquisitions, colonial conquests, and modern theocratic regimes illustrate how faith, when combined with wealth and political authority, can be mobilized to enforce control, suppress dissent, and marginalize groups deemed unfaithful or immoral. The use of divine justification for political action creates a powerful tool for shaping societies according to the interests of the institution rather than the well-being of individuals. Even charitable activities can be intertwined with control. Religious organizations often provide food, education, and healthcare to communities in need. On the surface, this appears benevolent, but these services are frequently conditional, tied to compliance with doctrine or participation in rituals. Aid may come with implicit or explicit demands: attendance at religious services, adherence to moral codes, or conversion. While these acts of charity help some, they simultaneously reinforce the authority of the religious institution and bind recipients to its influence. The wealth and political reach of religion also protect it from scrutiny. Religious institutions often claim immunity from criticism, legal accountability, or social reproach. Leaders who misuse funds, abuse followers, or engage in corrupt practices are sometimes shielded by the institution's power and by social norms that discourage questioning faith. This double standard reinforces submission, suggesting that religious authority is beyond accountability, while ordinary individuals remain subject to law, ethics, and social criticism. Furthermore, the intertwining of religion, wealth, and politics perpetuates cycles of influence and inequality. Powerful religious institutions maintain their authority by controlling resources, shaping public opinion, and influencing governance. Followers, in turn, internalize obedience, often at personal and economic cost. Children are raised within this system, absorbing the rules, norms, and hierarchies as unquestioned truths. Over generations, the cycle reinforces itself. Wealth supports power, power enforces obedience, and obedience sustains wealth. In summary, organized religion functions not only as a belief system, but as a socio-economic and political institution. Its accumulation of wealth and influence enables control over thought, behavior, and opportunity. By intertwining spiritual authority with financial and political power, religious institutions maintain obedience, enforce conformity, and protect themselves from scrutiny. While religion may provide community and comfort, its entanglement with money and governance demonstrates that its reach is not purely spiritual. It is a mechanism for sustaining power and authority. Recognizing this dynamic is essential for understanding the broader role of religion in society, particularly the ways in which it shapes freedom, justice, and equity. Understanding religion's economic and political dimensions reveals a clear pattern. Wealth and authority are used to preserve control, often at the expense of individual autonomy and critical thinking. Only by examining these mechanisms can we distinguish between genuine spiritual guidance and institutional power. True spiritual or moral development is not dependent on wealth, political influence, or coerced obedience. It thrives in environments that encourage independent thought, empathy, and ethical reasoning. Awareness of this distinction is crucial for building societies where freedom of belief, expression, and action are genuine, and where morality is informed by compassion rather than financial or political coercion. Religion versus science and intellectual progress. One of the most significant tensions in human history is the conflict between organized religion and intellectual progress. While religion claims to offer insight into truth, morality, and the nature of existence, its structures often resist questioning, scrutiny, and empirical investigation. Science, philosophy, and critical inquiry, on the other hand, thrive on doubt, evidence, and the continuous revision of understanding. The clash between these approaches has shaped societies, education, and human advancement for centuries. Organized religion frequently positions itself as the ultimate source of knowledge, claiming to speak for divine authority and providing prepackaged answers to life's most profound questions. It offers certainty, telling followers what to believe, how to behave, and what will happen after death. While this may provide comfort, it discourages independent thinking and inquiry. Curiosity, doubt, and critical reasoning, the very tools that have led humanity to explore, invent, and understand the universe, are often framed as dangerous or sinful. Questioning doctrine is equated with moral weakness or rebellion, rather than an essential part of intellectual growth. Throughout history, religious authorities have often opposed scientific discoveries that challenge traditional interpretations of Scripture. The heliocentric model proposed by Copernicus and championed by Galileo faced fierce opposition from the Church because it contradicted the long-held belief that the Earth was the center of the universe. Early medical advances were hindered by religious superstition, as diseases were attributed to demonic forces rather than biological processes. Evolutionary theory, germ theory, and countless other discoveries were met with skepticism, resistance, or outright condemnation because they conflicted with sacred texts or religious teachings. This resistance to evidence and inquiry has lasting consequences. Education, one of the most powerful tools for human progress, is frequently shaped by religious influence. Curricula in many parts of the world prioritize religious doctrine over scientific reasoning, teaching children to memorize beliefs rather than to investigate and analyze. When critical thinking is replaced by rote adherence to ancient texts, innovation slows, and societies become less capable of adapting to new knowledge or solving complex problems. The very institutions that claim to guide humanity toward wisdom often act as barriers to it. Religion's approach to knowledge is fundamentally different from science. While science is provisional, self-correcting, and guided by evidence, religion often presents conclusions as immutable truths. In a scientific framework, understanding evolves. Hypotheses are tested, results are scrutinized, and theories are revised in light of new evidence. Religion, by contrast, prioritizes continuity and authority. Texts, rituals, and dogma are treated as perfect and unchangeable, regardless of contradictions or advances in human understanding. This insistence on fixed answers discourages exploration and fosters intellectual stagnation. The consequences of this mindset extend beyond abstract knowledge. Societal progress in medicine, technology, civil rights, and environmental stewardship is slowed when religious doctrines clash with empirical evidence. Debates over vaccines, climate change, reproductive health, and education frequently reveal the tension between faith-based authority and evidence-based reasoning. When religious adherence supersedes reason, public health, safety, and human rights can be compromised. Individuals are forced to choose between submission to unverified authority and engagement with the world as it is observed and tested. Religion also often misrepresents the nature of knowledge itself. It positions ancient texts and unverified claims as eternal truths while dismissing observation, experiment, and reason as flawed or inferior. This inversion of epistemology, the study of what we know and how we know it, has profound effects on intellectual development. Followers may be trained to accept assertions without question, to equate faith with understanding, and to resist evidence that challenges doctrine. Critical thinking is replaced with loyalty, curiosity with obedience, and discovery with repetition of ritual. Moreover, organized religion often co-opts scientific or philosophical claims to appear credible while simultaneously rejecting inconvenient evidence. Historical examples include attempts to reconcile heliocentrism with scripture after centuries of opposition, or the selective interpretation of genetics, geology, or archaeology to fit preconceived narratives. This strategy maintains authority while giving the illusion of engagement with truth. It ensures that even as human understanding expands, the institution retains control over interpretation and belief. Despite these challenges, human progress persists. Science, philosophy, and secular inquiry have allowed humanity to map the genome, travel to space, cure diseases, and explore the cosmos. Technological and intellectual advancements flourish when curiosity is encouraged, doubt is tolerated, and evidence is respected. In contrast, organized religion often resists these advances because questioning its authority threatens the stability of the system. This resistance is not merely about preserving belief, it is about preserving power, influence, and control. Yet, it is crucial to recognize that religion's opposition to science is not universal. Many individuals reconcile faith with reason, interpreting spiritual teachings metaphorically rather than literally. Others have contributed to scientific advancement while maintaining personal religious beliefs. However, institutionalized religion, with its hierarchical structures and insistence on dogma, often prioritizes obedience over inquiry, tradition over discovery, and certainty over exploration. The system itself, rather than the individuals within it, frequently acts as a barrier to intellectual freedom. Religion's fear of questioning is evident in its treatment of doubt. Doubt is often labeled as sinful, dangerous, or morally corrupting. This discourages honest inquiry and stigmatizes intellectual exploration. Children and adults alike are taught to suppress questions about morality, cosmology, and existence, replacing curiosity with ritual compliance. Such suppression is at odds with the very nature of learning and the pursuit of truth, which depend on exploration, experimentation, and critical evaluation. At its core, religion's resistance to intellectual progress highlights a broader principle. Organized religion is built to maintain authority, not to facilitate understanding. By presenting fixed answers and discouraging critical thought, it ensures the perpetuation of its influence. Curiosity is controlled, dissent is marginalized, and knowledge is filtered through doctrine rather than empirical evidence. The system rewards certainty, regardless of accuracy, while penalizing questioning, effectively prioritizing loyalty over truth. Yet, this does not negate humanity's capacity for reason. Every scientific breakthrough, philosophical insight, and technological achievement demonstrates the power of inquiry over dogma. By questioning assumptions, testing hypotheses, and embracing uncertainty, humans have expanded their understanding of the world far beyond the limits imposed by ancient texts. Intellectual freedom is not just a luxury. It is a prerequisite for ethical development, societal progress, and the pursuit of truth. In conclusion, organized religion's relationship with science and intellectual progress is complex, but often adversarial. Its insistence on unchallengeable truths, authority over inquiry, and obedience over exploration has historically slowed human understanding and limited critical thinking. While individual believers may reconcile faith and reason, institutionalized religion frequently prioritizes tradition and power over knowledge and discovery. Recognizing this dynamic is essential for fostering societies that value curiosity, evidence, and the continuous pursuit of understanding. True intellectual progress arises not from adherence to dogma, but from the courage to question, investigate, and evolve. Religion, morality, and the illusion of ethical authority. One of the most enduring claims of organized religion is that it provides a moral compass, a framework for distinguishing right from wrong, guiding human behavior, and instilling virtue. Religious institutions often portray themselves as the ultimate arbiters of ethics, asserting that morality derives from divine command rather than human reasoning. Yet, a closer examination reveals that religious morality is neither universal, consistent, nor necessarily conducive to genuine ethical development. In fact, organized religion often conflates obedience with virtue and compliance with moral understanding, producing a system where fear and authority overshadow empathy and reason. Historically, many of the moral codes presented by religions were crafted within specific cultural, social, and economic contexts. They reflected the norms, fears, and priorities of the time, rather than timeless ethical principles. Practices such as slavery, ritual sacrifice, and gender-based restrictions were often justified through divine mandate. When viewed objectively, these prescriptions frequently conflict with contemporary ethical understanding. For example, while some ancient texts condemned theft or murder, they simultaneously endorsed systemic violence, inequality, and punitive cruelty. This highlights a fundamental problem. Morality dictated by Scripture is as fallible as the human societies that produced it. Religious morality also tends to be absolute and prescriptive rather than reflective and situational. Rules about dietary restrictions, clothing, sexual behavior, and worship are often treated as indicators of moral character. Compliance with these rules is equated with goodness, while failure is framed as sin or moral failure. This approach reduces ethics to ritualized obedience rather than thoughtful engagement with the consequences of one's actions. True morality involves understanding, reflection, and consideration of human well-being, not merely following commands because they are labeled sacred. Fear plays a central role in religious ethics. From threats of eternal punishment to guilt over imagined transgressions, organized religion frequently motivates behavior through coercion rather than conscience. People are often taught to act rightly, not because it benefits others or aligns with universal principles of fairness, but because failing to do so incurs divine wrath. Morality based on fear is fundamentally different from morality based on empathy or reason. A person who refrains from harming others solely to avoid punishment is not demonstrating ethical insight. They are demonstrating compliance. Religion often conflates this compliance with virtue, misleading followers into believing that devotion equals ethical maturity. Another aspect of religious morality is its inconsistency across traditions. What is considered virtuous in one religion may be condemned in another. Some faiths prohibit specific foods, certain relationships, or particular forms of expression, while others celebrate or mandate them. This inconsistency underscores the cultural contingency of religious ethics. Morality is tied to tradition and authority rather than objective principles. If morality were truly derived from divine wisdom, it would not vary so dramatically between societies, each claiming exclusive access to truth. Religious morality also often prioritizes ritual and form over the substance of ethical behavior. Observing rules and performing rituals can become more important than understanding the human impact of one's actions. For example, fasting, prayer, or sacrificial offerings may be lauded as signs of righteousness, even if the individual fails to act compassionately in daily life. Ethical life becomes a matter of appearances and adherence to prescribed behaviors, rather than a commitment to reducing suffering or promoting human flourishing. This misalignment between ritual and real-world morality can produce followers who appear pious but act unethically in practice. At the same time, organized religion frequently imposes moral frameworks without allowing independent reasoning. Children and adults are often taught that moral questions have fixed answers embedded in scripture or tradition. Critical reflection is discouraged, and dissent is treated as rebellion or corruption. This suppression of ethical reasoning prevents the development of autonomous moral judgment, limiting the ability of individuals to navigate complex situations thoughtfully. Real-world ethical dilemmas are rarely black and white. Morality requires nuance, empathy, and flexibility, qualities that are often underdeveloped in systems that prioritize obedience over inquiry. Religion also plays a role in shaping societal laws and norms, often codifying ethical behavior in ways that enforce compliance rather than encourage understanding. Legal systems influenced by religious doctrine may impose penalties for actions deemed sinful, rather than assessing harm or intent. This can create a culture where morality is externally enforced rather than internally cultivated. People behave ethically, not because they understand why it matters, but because disobedience carries social, legal, or spiritual consequences. In this sense, religion can conflate power with virtue, teaching that authority, rather than reason, determines morality. Despite these limitations, many individuals find genuine moral guidance within religious frameworks. Religion can inspire acts of compassion, generosity, and service. Communities often mobilize to help the needy, support education, and provide charity. However, it is important to distinguish between moral behavior motivated by authentic empathy and behavior motivated by reward or fear. When ethical actions are performed to secure divine favor or avoid punishment, the practice becomes transactional, not truly moral. The distinction is subtle but critical. Morality arises from understanding and empathy, not from following rules under coercion. Moreover, history demonstrates that some of the most profound moral advances have come from individuals who challenged religious authority rather than adhering to it unquestioningly. Abolitionists, civil rights leaders, human rights advocates, and social reformers often faced opposition from religious institutions. They derived their ethical vision from reason, empathy, and justice, rather than divine command. This underscores a central insight. Genuine morality is not dependent on religion. In many cases, it flourishes despite religious authority. Religious morality is also vulnerable to manipulation. Leaders and institutions can exploit moral teachings to consolidate power, justify violence, or enforce conformity. Throughout history, wars, persecutions, and acts of oppression have been committed under the banner of divine will. By controlling the definition of right and wrong, religious authorities can enforce obedience and silence dissent, presenting moral compliance as a spiritual obligation. This creates a cycle in which morality is subordinated to authority rather than guiding it. Finally, it is worth noting that secular frameworks for ethics can achieve moral clarity without reliance on divine authority. Philosophical systems such as utilitarianism, Kantian ethics, and virtue ethics rely on reason, empathy, and reflection to define moral principles. Humanist approaches prioritize well-being, justice, and compassion, allowing ethical development to be grounded in human experience rather than ancient texts. In these frameworks, morality evolves with society, responding to new knowledge, changing circumstances, and emerging insights. This adaptability contrasts sharply with religious morality, which often resists evolution to maintain continuity and control. In conclusion, organized religion presents itself as the ultimate source of morality, but its ethical framework is often based on obedience, fear, and authority rather than reason, empathy, or universal principles. Morality within religious systems varies across cultures, prioritizes ritual over substance, and frequently suppresses independent ethical reasoning. While religion can inspire good deeds, true moral understanding arises from reflection, empathy, and rational engagement with the consequences of our actions. By recognizing the distinction between obedience and virtue, humanity can cultivate morality that is informed by compassion and critical thinking, rather than by fear and doctrinal compliance. Control, influence, and the psychological machinery of religion. Organized religion is not merely a set of beliefs. It is a complex social system designed to regulate thought, behavior, and identity. Beyond offering answers to existential questions, religion functions as a mechanism of control. From childhood indoctrination to adult conformity, religious institutions cultivate loyalty, obedience, and dependence, often under the guise of morality, tradition, or divine authority. Understanding this aspect is crucial because while religion may present itself as a path to enlightenment, its structural and psychological mechanisms often prioritize institutional survival over individual growth. At the heart of this system is the human desire for certainty. Life is inherently uncertain, filled with suffering, loss, and mystery. Religion exploits this anxiety, offering fixed answers to questions that are fundamentally unanswerable. Why are we here? What happens after death? Why do bad things happen? By providing predetermined explanations, religion alleviates fear, but at a cost. It trains individuals to accept authority without question, replacing curiosity and exploration with submission. This creates a dependency in which the institution becomes the intermediary between the believer and meaning itself. Indoctrination begins early. Children are taught that the truths of their faith are absolute, that questioning is dangerous, and that obedience is virtuous. They memorize texts, recite prayers, and participate in rituals long before they develop critical reasoning skills. By the time reasoning and skepticism emerge, many have internalized belief as identity. Religious affiliation is not merely a set of opinions, it is a social and psychological anchor. To challenge it feels like betrayal, not just of doctrine, but of family, community, and self. This is a powerful method of control because it binds compliance to identity, making dissent emotionally and socially costly. Fear and guilt are central instruments in this system. Followers are frequently taught that they are inherently flawed, sinful, or spiritually deficient. This sense of inadequacy is reinforced through the promise of salvation contingent on submission. People are told that without adherence to prescribed beliefs and rituals, they face eternal punishment or social ostracism. In effect, religion monetizes and weaponizes fear. It creates a problem, the imperfection or sin of the human condition, and sells the solution, obedience to divine law. This psychological loop is self-reinforcing, ensuring compliance and suppressing doubt. Obedience is further reinforced through ritual repetition. Daily prayers, weekly services, sacramental participation, and adherence to dietary or behavioral restrictions habituate individuals to routine compliance. Ritual serves multiple functions. It normalizes authority, binds individuals to the group, and masks the mechanisms of control beneath the veneer of spirituality. Over time, these repeated actions condition followers to accept externally imposed rules as morally and spiritually necessary. The effect is subtle but profound. Compliance becomes instinctual, and questioning is psychologically uncomfortable. Social pressure amplifies the power of religious control. Communities often celebrate conformity and stigmatize divergence. Apostasy, heresy, or dissent can result in social exclusion, familial tension, or even legal consequences in certain countries. Religion thrives on the human need for belonging, leveraging community bonds to enforce adherence. Social enforcement transforms abstract belief into lived behavior. Fear of judgment, shame, or isolation becomes a stronger motivator than reasoned ethical reflection. In this way, religious systems exert influence far beyond theology, shaping personal choices, relationships, and social norms. Authority figures within religion consolidate control. Priests, imams, rabbis, and other clerics claim to speak for the divine, presenting themselves as intermediaries between humanity and ultimate truth. Their power is rarely derived from evidence, reason, or ethical excellence. It is granted and maintained through tradition, ritual, and institutional hierarchy. This concentration of authority allows religious leaders to dictate morality, influence law, and shape political and social life. Decisions that affect millions can be framed as divine will, bypassing scrutiny and accountability. Economic and political influence further extends religious control. Religions often command significant financial resources through donations, tithes, and institutional wealth. This financial power is leveraged to maintain influence over media, education, and government. In many societies, religious institutions lobby for laws that align with doctrinal positions, influence curricula in schools, and exert pressure on public policy. Even ostensibly charitable acts are frequently tied to proselytization or social compliance. The intersection of faith, money, and power creates a system in which obedience and loyalty are rewarded, while critical inquiry is discouraged. Religion also manipulates perception through narrative control. Sacred texts, stories, and parables are presented as absolute truth, even when they are internally contradictory or historically inaccurate. By framing knowledge as divine, religion protects itself from scrutiny. Followers are encouraged to accept paradox and mystery as evidence of transcendence rather than as a failure of reasoning. This rhetorical technique discourages critical thinking, conflates faith with intelligence, and promotes unquestioning reverence. Mystery becomes a tool of control, replacing understanding with awe. Psychologically, religion capitalizes on cognitive biases. Humans are predisposed to confirmation bias, pattern recognition, and deference to authority. Religion exploits these tendencies by providing narratives that reinforce existing beliefs, selectively validating experiences, and framing disobedience as morally or spiritually perilous. Prayer, ritual, and communal worship reinforce belief through emotional and social reinforcement rather than empirical evidence. Over time, these processes create deeply ingrained mental frameworks in which doubt feels unnatural, dangerous, or sinful. Moreover, religion frequently restricts access to alternative perspectives. By presenting itself as the sole path to truth, it discourages exploration of other ideas, philosophies, or scientific knowledge. Critical thinking is framed as rebellion, curiosity as temptation, and dissent as moral failure. The resulting intellectual insularity limits creativity, critical reflection, and personal growth. Followers may excel at memorizing doctrine, but remain ill-equipped to navigate complex moral or existential questions independently. Finally, the illusion of spiritual authority perpetuates itself through social and psychological reinforcement. Devotion is rewarded with praise, social recognition, and spiritual assurance. Dissent is punished with shame, exclusion, or threats of divine retribution. Ritual, narrative, and community function as mechanisms to normalize obedience and minimize skepticism. By the time individuals reach adulthood, many internalize these controls, seeing them as natural, moral, and necessary for their own well-being. This perpetuation of control ensures the survival of the system, independent of the truth or validity of its claims. In conclusion, organized religion operates as a sophisticated system of social and psychological control. Through indoctrination, fear, ritual, authority, and community enforcement, it shapes behavior, belief, and identity. While it may offer comfort, meaning, or moral guidance, these benefits often come at the cost of critical thinking, personal autonomy, and intellectual freedom. By recognizing these mechanisms, individuals can begin to differentiate genuine insight from imposed compliance, develop ethical reasoning independent of authority, and reclaim the capacity to explore, question, and understand the world on their own terms. Freedom, inquiry, and the power of thinking for yourself. After examining the structures, strategies, and psychological mechanisms that underpin organized religion, the picture becomes clear. Religion is not simply a neutral collection of beliefs. It is a system carefully designed over centuries to perpetuate authority, control behavior, and shape identity. While it claims to offer truth, morality, and meaning, much of its power relies not on evidence or reason, but on obedience, fear, and social conformity. Understanding this allows us to ask a critical question. What does it mean to live authentically, beyond the confines of ritual, dogma, and inherited authority? At its core, questioning religion is about reclaiming agency over your own mind. For much of human history, belief has been assigned rather than chosen. Children are taught the faith of their parents, communities enforce conformity, and deviation is punished, sometimes subtly, sometimes violently. This leaves little room for independent thought. By reflecting critically on these inherited structures, you begin to recognize the difference between ideas imposed on you and ideas you reach through personal inquiry. Authentic belief or knowledge emerges not from fear or ritual, but from reasoned exploration, experience, and reflection. Freedom begins with questioning. Every person has the right to ask, does this make sense? Does this align with what I know about the world? Does this reflect the values I want to embody? These questions are not signs of weakness or disrespect. They are the foundation of intellectual integrity. Real curiosity embraces uncertainty. It allows us to explore ideas without the need for prepackaged answers. Where organized religion often closes doors, critical inquiry opens them. It encourages us to confront contradictions, challenge authority, and refine our understanding through evidence, dialogue, and lived experience. Morality is another area where thinking for yourself transforms understanding. Religion often claims a monopoly on ethical guidance, implying that goodness requires adherence to doctrine or fear of punishment. Yet history and observation demonstrate that empathy, compassion, and ethical reasoning do not require divine supervision. Humans act morally not merely because they are commanded to, but because of shared understanding, empathy, and rational reflection. By disentangling ethics from dogma, individuals can cultivate moral frameworks that are flexible, evidence-informed, and aligned with human flourishing. Goodness becomes an active choice rather than a conditioned response to authority. The pursuit of meaning is similarly liberated through independent thought. Organized religion often presents itself as the only path to purpose, offering pre-packaged narratives about destiny, salvation, or divine will. While these narratives may provide comfort, they can also limit creativity, personal growth, and the search for authentic purpose. When you recognize that meaning is human created rather than divinely mandated, you gain the freedom to construct a life guided by curiosity, passion, and personal values. Purpose becomes something to explore and refine, not to inherit unquestioningly. Knowledge and understanding thrive in an environment of openness. Science, philosophy, art, and human dialogue are all methods for expanding awareness, refining understanding, and challenging assumptions. Unlike dogma, these disciplines reward inquiry, embrace uncertainty, and evolve over time. They do not demand submission or conformity. They demand evidence, reason, and reflection. By embracing these tools, individuals gain the ability to navigate the world with clarity, discernment, and resilience. Knowledge is no longer handed down. It is earned through engagement, experimentation, and critical thinking. Psychological liberation is an essential part of this process. Organized religion often binds identity, morality, and self-worth to obedience. Breaking free from unquestioned belief allows individuals to reclaim emotional autonomy. Guilt, fear, and shame, frequently used as tools of control, lose their power when they are recognized as instruments of manipulation rather than absolute moral truths. Freedom of thought is inseparable from freedom of emotion. The right to doubt, question, and explore without fear is essential for mental and spiritual well-being. At the societal level, thinking independently can foster healthier communities. Religion frequently divides people into categories: believers and non-believers, saved and damned, chosen and condemned. These divisions have historically fueled conflict, discrimination, and violence. By emphasizing critical inquiry, empathy, and shared human values over inherited dogma, societies can cultivate cohesion based on understanding rather than enforced conformity. Cooperation, ethics, and justice flourish not through fear of punishment, but through reasoned agreement and mutual respect. Critically, rejecting the authoritarian elements of religion does not necessitate rejecting wonder, awe, or beauty. Humans are capable of profound spiritual, emotional, and aesthetic experiences without submitting to dogma. Awe can emerge from the vastness of the universe, the intricacy of life, and the complexity of human consciousness. Reverence can be grounded in knowledge, empathy, and curiosity rather than obedience to unverified authority. True wisdom listens, questions, and grows. It does not punish doubt, it cultivates understanding. The journey away from unquestioned religious authority is not always comfortable. It can provoke familial tension, social friction, and existential anxiety. Yet, the discomfort is part of growth. By facing uncertainty, embracing critical thinking, and navigating moral and existential questions independently, individuals develop resilience, authenticity, and intellectual integrity. Liberation from doctrinal control allows for a life informed by reason, compassion, and a commitment to personal and collective flourishing. As this series concludes, it is essential to reflect on a central truth. Organized religion is not inherently malicious, but it is a structure built to perpetuate authority and obedience. Its beauty, ritual, and community may offer comfort, but they also obscure the mechanisms of control. Recognizing these dynamics empowers individuals to separate genuine insight from inherited tradition, question dogma without fear, and engage with life on their own terms. The act of thinking, doubting, and exploring is itself a form of resistance against submission and a step toward intellectual and emotional liberation. If you have found yourself questioning inherited beliefs, know that you are not alone. Millions of people around the world are exploring existence, morality, and purpose outside the constraints of organized religion. The power to think for yourself is the foundation of freedom. The freedom to explore, to doubt, and to create meaning is not a threat. It is a human right. Every step toward inquiry strengthens the capacity for ethical action, intellectual growth, and emotional resilience. Now, it is your turn. Ask the questions that matter. Challenge the answers that don't satisfy reason. Build your ethics from empathy, your purpose from exploration, and your understanding from evidence. Speak freely, learn continuously, and surround yourself with those who value curiosity and honesty. Do not fear leaving a system that once promised comfort but demanded obedience. True comfort comes from clarity, not compliance. True wisdom comes from questioning, not rote acceptance. In a world filled with inherited beliefs, It is the courage to think independently that defines intellectual and spiritual liberation. The human mind is capable of extraordinary insight, creativity, and understanding. You are allowed to think for yourself. You are allowed to say, "This does not make sense." You are allowed to walk away from stories, rituals, and systems that no longer serve your growth. That is not rebellion. It is self-respect, reason, and the pursuit of truth. Take this as an invitation. Explore, inquire, and reclaim your mind. Build a life rooted in evidence, empathy, and understanding. Question what others fear to question. Pursue knowledge without fear of contradiction. Seek morality without coercion. And above all, remember, freedom of thought is the most profound gift you can give yourself. It allows you to live fully, act ethically, and embrace the wonder of existence on your own terms. You don't need rituals to be good. You don't need authority to find purpose. You don't need fear to find meaning. The universe is vast, mysterious, and breathtakingly beautiful, and your capacity to understand and engage with it is limitless. Embrace it, question boldly, think freely, and share that courage with others.